From Relay, this is Upgrade episode 555, a triple. Woo! It's brought to you by Fitbod, Google Gemini, Squarespace, and Delete Me. I am your host, Jason Snell. Mike Hurley, of course, continues to be on paternity leave, but paternity league. Actually, I really like that idea. It's like various fathers battling over who has the cutest baby pictures. Whoa, he keeps sending them to me. It's really nice to hear from him. He's out there somewhere. Joining me in our latest of our cavalcade of guests while Mike is gone is the one, the only, my fellow JS, John Siracusa. Welcome, John. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here as always.
If I sound extra energetic today, it's because my plane got home from my weekend in Portland, Oregon at 12:30 a.m. and there's a lot of tea, so that's good. But we don't have time to talk about airlines. Let's talk about random things sent in by listeners. It's Snell Talk. And this question comes in from Tim. Tim says, whenever I hear Jason talk about Mill Valley, which is where I live, I think of Back to the Future. Is Hill Valley modeled on it? Do you have a mall? And if so, how many pines does it have? Important check for timeline questions. How many pines are at the mall? 2, 1, or who knows, another number of pines could be at the mall. The mall could just be a pine forest with no shopping. It could be. I don't know. I've wondered this question too. I think fundamentally Hill Valley is just a very funny name because it's a tall thing and a low thing, like put together. How could that be? Whereas Mill Valley is named after a sawmill that was in the valley below the mountain, and that's not a very interesting name, but that's the name that we got. I think the implication is that Hill Valley is in LA and not in, well, no, maybe it is. Okay. We're not going to go deep on Back to the Future geography, but there is they end up in a gold rush town. It's a gold rush town in the 19th century, which suggests that it is in Northern California. Probably, it moves around a lot. Sometimes it's very LA-like, sometimes it's very San Francisco-like. But I don't think it's really modeled on us. We are not as modern suburban as that because the geography here is very rugged and limited in southern Marin especially, and so we're kind of the towns up in a canyon and there's not room for the sort of suburban sprawl. There is a mall up the road, but it's not in Mill Valley. It's in a different city. So and John, related to that, I have a sun-blasted hellscape report for you because whenever you visit me, you point out the brown hills behind my house and say, this is a hellscape.
They're not just behind your house. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere in California, but they are specifically also behind my house. I'll just say it's March. It's St. Patrick's Day, and guess what? Those hills are beautifully green right now. Don't get used to it. They'll be brown very soon.
I think you're overthinking this Hill Valley, Mill Valley question. Like, I have only been to your town a few times, but it is geographically nothing like the, stereotypical backlot suburban street. I don't think there's anything like that there. Like, it's not that wide and flat and just,
No, we do have a downtown that is not, it's too small to be the Hill Valley downtown with the big square. There are other places in Marin that would probably be closer to that than Mill Valley. I think Mill Valley was resonating in their brains when they came up with Hill Valley, but I think fundamentally, I hate to say it, this is like a version of our friend Todd Vaziri's, is that a Easter egg or a thing in the movie? I think the answer is like, does this have deep meaning or is it just a really dumb pun?
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's Hill and Valley. That's it, really. But thank you, Tim, for writing in. There's no mall in Mill Valley, and the nearby malls don't seem to have any pines at all, which means we are in a bad timeline, but we already knew that. John, it is time for Fatherly Advice, a segment where we dispense some wisdom, ? To Mike, who is probably still listening to the show because it's early enough in the show that he hasn't given up in order to go feed a baby or apparently watch a Formula One race at 4 a.m. while feeding a baby, which is apparently what happened over the weekend. Do you have any words of wisdom to impart to Mike, listener Mike?
I heard the analog episode where he cut together like all the clips of like all the people that Mike does podcasts with on a regular basis, giving him fatherly advice. He's making good use of his connections to fathers to try to aggregate this, and you are continuing it. That was a
Yes.
good episode. I think he got a lot of good advice there. I actually had a discussion with my wife about this after I listened to that episode, and I said it's really difficult for me to think about what kind of fatherly advice I would give, and like I could fill this entire episode with just that type of thing. But what I was discussing with my wife, I said I would really struggle because my inclination would be to give the kind of advice that nobody wants to hear, because that's just my nature. Like, you don't want to tell people about the bad things that will be part of the difficult parts of fatherhood. Like, why? That's no, like, it's a happy occasion. You have a new baby. You're a new father. Let's not bring it down by talking about all the difficulties and the struggles and stuff like that. So a lot of my advice that I would give, I have to set aside. And then his questions were like advice for the first month, and then bigger picture advice. And bigger picture advice, I feel like new fathers, it's useless to them. Like, it's not time for like big picture fatherhood advice when you have a baby. Like, it's triage mode, right? Especially your first baby. It is kind of an all hands on deck emergency. There's this new living thing that you are responsible for. So I think the first month advice is more actionable than the big picture advice, because I just don't think the big picture advice, it's not time for that. It's not the appropriate occasion. So, given all that, my first month advice, and presumably, hopefully he doesn't need much of this now, but my first month advice is also kind of in the bummer vein, because again, me, and it would just be this, and I think he got some of this on his program, but people are trying to be a little bit nicer about it, which is, when you have struggles during, you're a new father, you've got a new baby, when you have struggles and difficult times, it's easy to think that the difficulties and thoughts that you're having are outside the bounds of normalcy. That, like, yeah, sure, everyone struggles, but no one feels this bad about this. No one dislikes this as much as I'm disliking it. No one, and you'll beat yourself up about it. You'll be like, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. I'm supposed to be happy that I have a new baby. Why am I having any negative feelings whatsoever about being a new father? And I'm here to tell you that any terrible negative feeling that you have that makes you feel guilty about having it, do not feel guilty. Other people have had it. Believe me. You are not alone in this, because people don't talk about it. People are like, oh, I have a new father. How is it? And everyone has to put a brave face on it and say how wonderful it is and how they're making it through, and it's tough, but I'm still loving every minute. You won't love every minute of it. And no one wants to hear you talk about that. And I just wanted to let you know, as a father who's had infants, that anything you're thinking and feeling that you're feeling guilty about, you should be assured that other people have thought and felt this exact same way, and they've also felt guilty about it, and beating yourself up about it doesn't help. And then, the other advice that he got on his program, which is totally true, is like, this will pass. You will get through it, and there'll be another thing and another thing and another thing. So everything is temporary. Hang in there, Mike.
Yeah, it's hard, and there's a lot before you have a baby. There's a lot of joking of like, ha ha ha, we won't sleep, ha ha ha, and it's not so funny when you
No.
haven't slept in days and the baby is crying and right at you as loud as it can, and there's nothing you can do to make the baby quiet. Like it's not ha 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 funny then.
Yeah,
It's
and the thing is,
just
you never want to tell this to people, because maybe they'll have a baby that is easier than average, right? And they won't know, because everyone's first baby is like, that's the only experience you have. But like, you don't want to scare people and think it's going to be terrible, because maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be just fine, right? But this is like, just in case you find yourself having negative thoughts about fatherhood that you thought you would never have, because you're supposed to be excited about it and it's supposed to be wonderful and beautiful. Don't worry. That's a thing that happens to everybody.
we're empty nesters, and I know you are very close to being in the same situation.
Not that close, but we'll see.
Well, all right. I mean, okay, we'll see.
Well,
see.
when my son graduates college, it's a question of whether he will come back to the house. So,
well, that is true. That is absolutely true. Yes, we're empty nesters for the time being, and then any day we could get a call that said,
Right.
"I'm returning home," and that's just what you just have to accept it. But what I was going to say is that one of Lauren's things that she has started to tell people, and she laughs about it, but it's also true, which is, they're just going to grow up and leave you.
If you're lucky.
It's not. Well, that's true. I mean, you got to look at both sides of it.
That's the goal. You're trying to give them escape velocity.
Yes, that is the goal. But it's tough to get there after all that, and then you miss your kids because they're not around. We just spent the weekend in Portland, and we got to spend a lot of time with Jamie. We were doing a curling thing, but we also got to spend a lot of time with Jamie. She came out to to Beaverton to the curling club and saw us there. And then we went in on Saturday and we had brunch with her. And then we had dinner with her yesterday before we went to the airport. It was really nice. But we also came to that realization that the thing about your kids leaving where you live and being somewhere else is that now you have to go visit them in addition to all the other travel you want to do. It just is, there's a lot going on there. But it's good to have her out on her own like that. Anyway, regardless, I think. Thank you for the fatherly advice, John. I appreciate it. I came up with this idea and didn't tell Mike, and then he did that whole episode, and I was like, I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to do fatherly advice. I don't care. Let's do a little bit. We're going to start Rumor Roundup, and then we'll probably do some of it after the next ad break as well. But I wanted to start a little Rumor Roundup now with you because, Mark Gurman, he publishes things on Sundays, and this podcast is recorded on Mondays, so it's perfectly primed to take in and decrypt or attempt to decrypt the mysterious reporting of Mark Gernberg. He's a new guy. Hey, look, I didn't get to sleep until 1:30. The iPhone Air was in his clutches this week in terms of his topic on his Power On newsletter. And he's reported about it a lot. He makes the point of saying, I call it the iPhone Air, which is good, right? Because we all know that they can invent a product and call it whatever they want, but until marketing signs off on what gets printed on a label and stuck to a box and put in a press release, it could be called anything. But he did go over some of the details he's already reported and added some new details. So just to summarize what he's saying, this is this fall's new entrant replacing the iPhone Plus. That it is 2 millimeters thinner than the existing iPhone, so that reduces it by about a fifth. It will have a screen that's around 6.6 inches, so a little bit bigger than the iPhone Pro, but smaller than the Max. Slim borders like the Pro. Pro Motion for smooth scrolling. That is an interesting tidbit. And a standard dynamic island interface. The camera control button. Battery life that's on par with current phones despite being far thinner. One camera, the C1 cellular modem. And then he said they were trying to make it bigger like Pro Max size, but that they had concerns that if you spread this thin thing over that big size, it will be too bendable and you'll get another bend gate. And he also said that they were talking again about the portless iPhone idea. What if there were no ports? None at all. And Gurman says they didn't go down that path because they were afraid that the EU would be mad at them for making a phone without USB-C and having another kind of argument about that, which that one
doesn't make
I'm
any
not
sense.
sure I'm not sure I buy that one at all. That feels like a telephone. Keep in mind, this is something Mike and I always talk about. It's like, keep in mind, who are his sources? What do they know? What do they not know? And do they have a particular point of view? And that one just feels like a telephone game kind of thing where they're like, yeah, the EU, and he maybe took that a little more legitimately than they did. But interesting, the thing that jumped out for me here was ProMotion, because that's not a low-end iPhone feature. But it sounds like they really are positioning this as it's not an iPhone 17 but thinner. It's something in between the iPhone and the iPhone Pro. What did you think about this report?
Yeah, this product is always, ever since it's been rumored as like the slimmer iPhone, it's always seemed like a luxury play. Like making something thinner and lighter in a realm where that is, desirable, and sacrificing some other stuff for it doesn't seem like the bargain model. It's so clearly the aesthetics and handling over utility, and that is a luxury type of thing. So it makes perfect sense to me that they would put ProMotion on it. Maybe the only reason it doesn't even have rumored to have the A19 Pro is because it's just too big and too hot, right? So it's got the plain A19. The whole phone is built around trying to be thin, and they're going to charge extra for that, extra over the plain 17. So that makes sense. And ProMotion, to tell you, I'm so sick of that being a differentiator. The state of the art has moved on. Soon it's going to be the cheapest, $99 Android phone you can buy is going to have a 120 hertz screen, and Apple's still going to be trying to differentiate the low end products. It's all right, now you had a good run. It's a good differentiator, but at a certain point you have to say, can we even get screens that are optimized for 60 hertz anymore? Or should we just anyway? And I realize it's more expensive for the fancy screens that can do like the one refresh per second and all that other stuff. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
this makes
but
sense.
16, 16 gigabytes of RAM is more expensive than 8, but at some point you really do have to just
Yeah, and it's
say
not
this is the
that much more
base.
expensive. Not that it's like yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of not that much more, is another thing I give a little bit of side eye for. Again, we need uh, some materials engineer like Dr. Drang to do the math on this. But
Hmm.
okay, they didn't want to make it bigger because they were afraid it would be too much. How much more leverage? How much additional bending power do you have for the mere millimeters of extra length and width that you would get with a whatever the max size is? Because what is the Pro is like 6.3 or something, and then the
Yeah,
max.
I mean, I'm terrible with those kind of numbers, but yeah,
But
it's
this
it's
is
a
a
little bit
diagonal measure,
it,
right?
it's not the Pro. It's not the Pro size. It's a little bit bigger, so it's closer to that Pro Max size already. But then they said they didn't
Yeah.
want to go the extra mile
So
there.
so even just like lay a Pro on top of a Pro Max, how much taller is it? And then do the math on how much extra force you get for an optimal scenario of like a fulcrum exactly in the middle. And if they're that close to the threshold of the thing bending that makes a difference, So anyway, that's going to be the challenge with a thin phone is to make sure it
Yep.
doesn't bend too much. But they've been there before. Hopefully they do a good job of it. I don't necessarily agree that the reason they didn't make it the Pro Max size was bending. There are so many other reasons you wouldn't make it that big, just because
Yeah.
like you're trying to split the difference here, and also it's so thin to get more battery. You want it to be bigger than the Pro, so this
Yeah,
makes
they
sense.
they it's I think they looked at it and they said, what price do we want to hit here? And they don't want it to be 11.99 like a Pro Max, right? They want it to be, maybe it's 9.99 like a
Mm-hmm.
Pro instead of 8.99 like the Plus, but I don't think they wanted to make it the high end model, right? I don't think they wanted to do that, and so as a result, I think they made, right, like a bigger phone is more expensive, right? Everything about it is more expensive. Gurman points out here too that like they really did target battery life with this, and they did that by saving power in other areas. I think that's the C1 in action, among
I
other
mean,
things.
I think the main place they get their battery life from is one camera. So
Yeah,
there's
one
just
camera,
plain more room, and they
just
made
more
the
room in
phone
there.
bigger. So both of those things, like
It's true.
square feet of battery,
That's
is where
and
you
that's the
get your battery life
dimension.
from.
That's the dimension that really helps, right? Like
Yeah.
it you make it thinner, but you also make it wider. You get some battery space back. You do some things with some maybe lower. Yeah, you get rid of the other cameras. You have a much more power sipping modem, and you put it all together, and you try to hit that battery level, whatever the battery goal is for them.
And the screen,
Yeah,
the ProMotion
sure.
screen, the other feature of it, I'm assuming, like all the other ones, is that it can do really low refresh rate that saves battery life when you're
Yeah,
not doing animation. So that all it all adds up to you look at this physically at the rumors of this phone, and they have models of it out. You can see exactly what size it's going to be. And it's like, yep, I can see that phone having pretty much the same battery life as the plain 17, given what's in
yeah.
it.
Or the 16E
Yeah.
might be a better model. I do kind of think the 16E was like experiment number one. This feels like experiment number two. And as Gurman wrote in his newsletter this week at Bloomberg, it breaks ground for future models. This was a thing that Mike and I talked about last year, that one of the reasons you might try to make a thin phone is that if you're going to make a folding phone, each of
Mm-hmm.
those planes has to be super thin.
Yep.
And so you're building up knowledge and experience building, trying to minimize the thickness of your phone on the path toward a foldable phone, which Gurman says might happen 26 or 27. And
Yeah.
he mentions that as a part of that, one of the other things they might do is finally do the proper kind of under display sensor thing. That means you don't need a dynamic island or as much of a cutout in the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. Um, I mean, I don't want to think about how expensive that phone is going to be, but I have to admit, as many issues as there are with iPad OS, and we're not even going to talk about, Federico Viticci wrote an article last week where he basically said, that Mr. iPad himself was like, I think I'm just going to go back to the Mac. The iPad is just kind of what it is, and it's not really any more than that. But I'll say this: Apple's experience building iPad OS and building an OS platform that allows tablet apps to be decent, I really start to think about that foldable iPhone being a nice iPhone that folds out into something that's more like an iPad. And I think I can see Apple having some real advantages there. And Gurman says that they are gonna the crease will be imperceptible, whatever that
Mm.
means. I don't know. It interests me as somebody who likes the iPad and has an iPhone. The idea that you could just carry around an iPhone and then pop it open and it's an iPad. I'm interested by that. I don't know if you find that
Is it like a
intriguing at all.
backdoor to make Instagram make an iPad app? Because they'll technically only be making a phone app, but if you want Instagram to fill the whole new foldable iPhone screen, you kind of
Hmm.
already it's already made an iPad app. I don't know. They'll still find a way to screw it up,
They will. They'll find a way to
but
ruin
that,
it.
I mean that's the problem with when Apple if and when Apple comes out with a foldable and the screen is just much larger, more like an iPad. Um, and phone apps have to fit themselves to that screen, will the guidance essentially be do what you do on an iPad mini, sort of? And if that's the case, they're back to the same old problem is like people want to make phone apps, and Apple's had real trouble getting even the biggest companies in the world to bother making a decent iPad app, or in the case of Instagram, an iPad app at all. And it's a little bit embarrassing for them how many things on the iPad don't really forget about taking advantage of the very latest features and everything like that. They just don't really care what they look like on the iPad.
Yeah, as somebody who uses my iPad a lot, I would say I think I don't think the situation is dire. I do think that they benefit from having built the system that makes it fairly easy for an iPhone app to be an iPad app and be decent. And mostly I say that because I think this year Google once again rededicated itself to making changes to allow their tablet apps to finally be good on Android. And, maybe they'll crack it, but they have said that so many times. And every time I've used an Android tablet, I have been aghast at how terrible it is.
Yeah, the
And
situation is way worse over there. That's why the
yeah,
iPad looks better. It's
it
literally the
does.
only viable tablet platform, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even if we complain about details, and there are plenty to complain about iPad apps, let me tell you, um, last year I did it again. Last year I bought an Android tablet and tried it out. That one that had the non-reflective screen, so they were trying to make it like an e-reader. And I opened those tablet apps on Android, and they're so bad. Like iPad users don't know how good they've got it just because that I mean, good for
What,
Google for acknowledging that yes, they are bad and we're going to try again. But they have tried. They have said that so many times, and it's still terrible. So I don't know what they're. I
yeah,
don't know.
and
And
that,
then where Apple's got iPad, they've got split view, and I think about the folding and unfolding iPhone, and I think that's been the frustration is it's the rare case in modern Apple where the software is all there. It really is. They got to get that hardware right in order to ship it. But I think their software story is decent.
yeah, the lack of competition from Google is actually really hurting Apple here because they don't. How would they feel any urgency when they're competing against nothing basically?
Yeah, yeah, it's not good over there. All right, we have a little more rumor roundup to do, but first I want to tell you about our sponsor. This episode of Upgrade is brought to you by Fitbod. When you want to change your fitness level, it can be hard to know where to start. I am pleased to let you know Fitbod is an easy and affordable way to build a fitness plan that's just for you. Everyone's fitness path is different. That's why Fitbod uses data to make sure they customize things exactly to suit you, adapting as you improve so each workout will be challenging, pushing you to make the progress you want. Superior results are achieved when a workout program is tailored to your unique body, experience, environment, and goals, which are all stored in your Fitbod gym profile. It tracks your muscle recovery so you can avoid burnout and keep up your momentum, and it builds your best possible workout by combining AI with exercise science. What? Chocolate and peanut butter. They've analyzed billions of data points. They have been fine tuned by certified personal trainers. You can be sure you're learning new movements the right way thanks to more than 1,000 different demonstration videos, so you will get it right. Muscles improve when working in concert with the entire muscular system. So overworking some muscles while underworking others can really hurt your results. That's why Fitbod tracks muscle fatigue and recovery to design a well-balanced workout routine, which means you never get bored as the app mixes up your workouts with new exercises, rep schemes, supersets, and circuits. Fitbod app is easy to use. You can stay informed with progress tracking charts, weekly reports, and sharing cards, letting you keep track of your achievements and personal bests and share them with friends and family. And yes, it integrates with your Apple Watch, Wear OS smartwatch. What? I mean, okay. And apps like Strava, Fitbit, and Apple Health. I know that Mike is a real big fan of Fitbod, and he uses it all the time and really appreciates the fact that it fits his personal life. Sounds pretty good to me. Personalized training of this quality can be expensive, but Fitbod is just $12.99 a month or $79.99 a year, and you can get 25% off your membership by signing up at fitbod.me/upgrade. Go now, get your customized fitness plan at fitbod.me/upgrade. That's fitbod.me/upgrade. 25% off your membership. Thank you to Fitbod for supporting Upgrade. Okay, John. I guess they're redesigning all the things. That's the other story that's out there this week. I know you guys talked about this on ATP last week. People can check that out. As always, I assume most people have already checked that out. But it is a wild idea that Apple is going to spend this summer unveiling a dramatic overhauled redesign across all of their operating systems, iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. And it may be, I would not say inspired by visionOS, because I don't think that's how it works. I think visionOS was the first aspect of this project to do an OS redesign to drop. That's how you would do it, is you'd say, what's our new, oh, we've got a new OS coming out. Well, let's use it as the testing ground for our new thing. But macOS, iOS, iPadOS as well. And a stated goal, at least in the report, is some more kind of unification of operating systems, which, anybody who's used the settings app on the Mac, it's got to put a chill down your spine. What do you think about this?
Yeah, like I said on ATP, like the first question about any kind of overhaul like this is, to what end? Why are we doing this? And there are answers. I mean, the most obvious one is you just got to change the look of things every once in a while to keep things fresh. And we've had the current look, even though it has evolved over time for a long time now. And you can add excitement to all your platforms by saying, look at this new look. I mean, just think of Aqua for the Mac. It was controversial. But it sure added a ton of excitement. I mean, I don't know if the rollout of macOS 10 would have been half as exciting if they hadn't decided to do something incredibly bold with the look and feel of their operating system. They could have just shipped it as Platinum. I mean, macOS 10 server was like that. You could switch the betas back to that, right? But they even could have gone with the next look if they wanted to, but they came up with something entirely new, and it added a lot of controversy and a lot of excitement. And so you have to do that every once in a while. So that's one of the answers. Now, given the other things we may talk about in this episode and the current state of Apple, this isn't great timing for them to say, every 10 years or so we should do a big look and feel overhaul. But we're kind of in the middle of a crisis involving technology that's unrelated to look and feel. And so the timing's not great. I mean, on the one hand, if everybody loves the new look, hey, this really helps us with the difficulties we're having in other areas, right? On the other hand, if the new look turns out not so good, which a lot of people feel like it might, based on past history, this is a bad time for that to be layered on top of all the Apple Intelligence stuff. And I think the main reason, especially people in the know, are wary about this is, like you said, Apple's recent history in doing similar things, but just in general, hardware and software, one of the things that Apple has stumbled on in the past decade has been finding the right balance between form and function. And that is a balance, and you can't be all in one direction or the other. But for a while, in both hardware and software, it seems like Apple had been choosing form over function. They would make beautiful computers that didn't have the functionality, didn't have the ports and everything people needed. They would want to make it as thin, their phones as thin as possible, and then they would bend. They want to make the keyboard as thin as possible, and then it would break. And on the software platforms, they would redesign Mac apps that were full featured to make them look more like their iOS counterparts and lose half the features of them, and they would never come back, right? It's beautiful, it's consistent, it looks nice, but it's like, these aren't just objects we look at. We like them to look nice, but we also have to use them. So what is the correct balance? And thinking about Apple doing a multi-platform redesign, we're just out here going, boy, I hope those bad instincts don't come out. I hope they don't lean heavily into simplification, making everything look as clean and as beautiful as their least capable platform. Especially on the Mac, you don't want them to be inspired by how simple things are on the phone, because the phone is the phone and the Mac is the Mac. They're very different platforms. It would almost be as if the redesign for the phone had the information density and precision pointing requirements of the Mac user interface from like a decade ago. That would be equally inappropriate. Apple does not go in that direction, but you really have to let each platform be true to itself. And that's Apple will give lip service to that all day, but we look at what they've done recently, and so we're worried, we're concerned. We've seen them make incorrect choices recently, and basically not remedy those. Like settings on the Mac, it did one of the things it had to accomplish, which was give me a more scalable, easier way to add settings because there are so many of them, and make them a little bit easier to find with a better search, which arguably whether they did that. But
Yeah.
I think the actual day-to-day use of that is that it is less pleasant to use than the old one. It doesn't look as good, and you've just moved everything so no one can find anything anymore. And the places where things are don't really, I mean, they're new places, but set aside that they're new, the places things are don't really make that much sense. Lots of things are hidden under little eyes in a circle with
Yep.
modal things on top of other things. So we look at that and we're like, at best, it's a wash. At worst, you've just sort of, made different mistakes.
So I am going to give what I'm going to call an optimistic take on this. This is not a prediction. Okay? Because I agree with you. I am concerned that the track record here recently is not good. But my optimistic prediction, or not non-prediction, my optimistic scenario,
Your hope.
there's the word. My hope is because one of the things that I keep thinking is like it's not as simple as it looks from the outside. It's very easy to cherry pick things from the outside and not understand what actually was going on the inside. And I firmly believe you get judged on your output. You don't ship. It's like when all those COVID hurt shows shipped out nonsensical episodes, and they said, "But COVID," and it's like.
Mm-hmm.
I understand and I feel for you, but your episodes were still bad,
right?
And you don't get a pass for that, even though I understand it emotionally. In the end, you are not judged because it was hard to ship. You're judged on what you ship. But that said, I do wonder, first off, when we talk about the things that they've done recently to the Mac to make them more like the iPhone and the iPad, and they are often not very good and don't make sense. I mean, the checkboxes example is a great one where switches where you can't necessarily even detect whether it's on or off or what you do when you click on it. What does it do? Whereas a checkbox that's empty or full is pretty clear. But I think that was a directive to make the Mac more like the iPhone and the iPad, right? I think that was the idea.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the impulse, which is we want a family resemblance between our products so that if you're an iPhone user, you'd rather use a Mac than a PC because it will be more familiar to you.
And there are so many more iPhone users.
There are so many more iPhone users, which means even now they are picking up new Mac users who've never used a Mac before because people are so comfortable in the Apple ecosystem, and you want to give them a leg up. You want them to be able to sort of understand the Mac conceptually, especially if they've only ever used a PC or a Chromebook. I get all of that. But my optimistic view is what we saw was literally make it more like the iPad. Slap some iPad and iPhone coding on the Mac in order to make it look a little more like the other products. And what I want to believe, because, right, like everything, it could be a new movie gets announced and everybody's like, well, that could be terrible. It's like, well, literally every project could be terrible. And literally every project could be good. It depends on how they execute it. We don't know what's going on inside. But I look at these reports and I think what they may be doing is saying, look, we have so many platforms. They've all evolved separately. We've tried to put new coats of paint on parts of them. But what we really need to do, since we haven't done it since 7, really, is let's go back and come up with a Apple interface language for the rest of the 2020s and how it varies. And good design would be how it varies across our platforms based on what kind of device they are. Because a watch and an Apple TV and a Vision Pro and a Mac and an iPhone and an iPad are all different, but you want to make them feel sort of familiar. So a good design team would absolutely do all of that. And that's why my theory is that the Apple or the Vision Pro is a forerunner of that. Because if you've got a whole project to rethink all of your OS interfaces for the future and you're shipping the Vision Pro, you could invent something completely random for it, but you're going to be replacing it with this new thing down the road. Why not have it be based on like draft 1 of that as you're building it out for all your all your platforms. So my optimistic view is the right thing to do at Apple would be to take a step back, come up with general principles about what the modern Apple design interface design should be, consider all your products and the ways that they, properly would be applied, and then come up with a whole system that's in place, that's consistent, that you can go out with across all your devices, that feels familiar but is also well designed in the sense of it's designed for the product that it's actually running on. That's not inconsistent with the reports we've gotten. I don't know if it's happening, but that would be the right thing to do.
Yeah, that is a plausible scenario of what the project might have been. Still not guaranteed. The project also might have been, oh, we really need a new look, come up with something. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
But here's the thing that always concerns me about that. Even if they that was the project they were undertaking, I no longer have the faith I used to have that the people who are available will make the correct choices for everything. You just laid out what's required of them. You have to do that. You have to, a new look for all our systems, do what's best for each platform. And it just seems
that's
to me
hard.
That, yeah,
it's really hard.
But it just seems to me that the people they have there do not understand what the strengths and weaknesses of the platforms are, as evidenced by what they do to them, particularly on the Mac, where I feel like the phone they have a pretty good read on. The iPad, we've just got done complaining about, it's not like, it seems like they don't understand the potential of that platform and what it can and should be, and so they end up treating it as a little bit more, less capable than we know it truly is. And the Mac especially, everything we've seen from them for over a decade has been to take the Mac and make it less capable and make it less good at the things that only the Mac can do. It's the only thing with a gigantic screen. It's the only thing with a guaranteed precision pointing device. It has the most complexity, has the most capability, it has the most complicated software, and everything they do to the Mac whenever they touch it makes me think they don't understand that and don't know. And so I agree with the project you've outlined. I wish the people executing it, I had more faith that they would do the right things.
Honestly, I don't know, because it's a black box, and I don't know anybody who has told me anything about this.
Yeah, this is going to be a small team, so
it's going to be. What I would say is, it's just as likely that the people there are actually very talented and agree with everything you're saying, but the resources they've been given and the directives they've been given over the last 5 or 10 years have made them do things that even they know that ain't it, but they have done it because that's just, I would almost guarantee you that people who designed the system app on Mac OS, the settings app, know everything that's wrong with it, but they either weren't given the authority to make it better, or they weren't given the resources to make it better, and so it just sits there. But in the end, it goes back to what I was saying, which doesn't matter. What you are is what you ship, right? That is the lesson of the real artist ship. What you ship is all that matters. The story behind it does not matter. It's either good or it's not, and what they've shipped hasn't generally been good. They've done some good stuff, but there's also been a lot of horrific stuff. So my hope is they were empowered to say, let's go back to the basics and start from the beginning, and then get this design out across all of our platforms, and a project that would probably have taken several years. And I hope that that's the case, right? Because the worst case scenario here is, it's a coat of new paint that isn't really well thought out. That's how you do a bad user interface. It's bad design. The Mac looks like this because of the iPhone, and that's not how a Mac works.
Or even if it's like they do undertake the project as you described it, but they say, and this is our answer to that, and our answer to that is less information density on the Mac. Our answer to that is massively simplified things on the Mac. Our answer to that is everything you've ever seen on the Mac is now legacy, and this is the way new Mac things look. And our answer to that is the new way things look on the Mac is not good, right? And so even if they undertake the right project, they would say, and here is our answer, and it's just that's what I'm really worried about. I'm just worried about them hurting the Mac. And the one thing I feel like you have in our favor is, it seems like system settings as an example, a recent part of the Mac that has been overhauled. Despite them trying to improve it and so on, and putting a brave face on Craig Federighi saying we think it's a great app, blah, 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 I think within Apple, they know that system settings redesign was not a hit.
Yes.
So they can convince themselves, well, it solves some problems for us and the user, and as long as people don't actively hate it, let's just call it a wash. But it wasn't a hit. No one was jazzed about it. Nobody was excited. Nobody was like, this is great. I hope they redo the whole OS to look like this. Like, that wasn't happening. So I hope they take that feedback. And it feels like we're kind of in the same situation we were with the Mac laptops for a while, where there was this pent up feeling where the customers just were frustrated because the customer base would say, Apple, do X, Y, and Z, and we will like your products better. And Apple just didn't have the ears to hear that for so long. And when they finally did, it was such a relief. Laptops, a little bit thicker, more ports, get rid of the touch bar, put it, and it's like, oh, thank God, Apple. And there was much rejoicing, and people, and it helps. Apple Silicon was amazing too. So, but still, like, it was felt like such a release. And I feel like we're in that same spot with the OS design stuff, where there is some obvious stuff that the world wants Apple to do, and so far they have just refused to do it. It's kind of the biggest version of that, of course, is the App Store, where it's just like, you can feel it all you want, but Apple's just not going to do it. But in the realm of hardware and software, there is like this pent up obvious thing. We wish they would come out, or like the Mac Roundtable, we wish they would come out and say, we hear you, you're right, we should rededicate ourselves to the Mac being the place for complexity, information density, and capability, moderated by, make easy things easy and hard things possible. Like, if they came out and said all the right things and had a design that backed it up, people would flip out. It would be great, right? Or on the flip side of that, if the new OS just plain looks really cool and has not that many things against it, just look at Aqua. Aqua had so many problems, but it looks so cool that you balanced all the problems with, but come on, it's super cool, right? And they glided on the super coolness until they got the whole rest of their fairly disastrous OS, like it was slow, it was buggy, it didn't run the stuff. Like, they glided on the coolness, and that can take you real far. So that's another possible saving scenario. Like, maybe, please just let it at least be like cool looking. That we really
You also
like.
go, I mean, there is an argument to be made, and this is what happened with Aqua, and it's what happened with iOS 7 is
you got to go too far.
You ship it at 130%.
Yeah.
And then you spend the next 3 years dialing it back to 100%. And like, that just happens. That happens with redesigns. I went through so many magazine and website redesigns, and I'm sure you have implemented many website redesigns, and like, everybody has a lot of great ideas, and then they meet reality, and then you back off of it. But what I'll tell you, I think bold redesigns that have to be backed off of are more effective than timid redesigns that aren't really redesigns. Like, if you're going to do it, have the courage of your convictions, and then you'll learn. You'll get beat up, and you'll be like, oh, that doesn't work. People don't like it. Let's change it. And you saw that with iOS. You saw that with macOS 10. I do have. Here's another little. I'm going to give you a little injection of optimism here too, John. Okay, you ready? I wonder if Apple is in a really different philosophical place with its OSs and its devices now than it was even 5 years ago. And this is the silver lining in the dark cloud of the evolution of the iPad, which is, I think Apple legitimately believed 10 years ago that the iPad was the future and that the Mac was going to go away. I think now the iPad is a curiosity that is mostly a media tablet that can also be used in some professional circumstances by some people, but will never be anything more than a Fisher-Price toy versus the Mac. And Apple is fine with that. Apple is just fine with that. It's not the future anymore. And meanwhile, in contrast, the Mac now seems to be the does everything product in their lineup, because it could theoretically run iPhone and iPad apps and control your iPhone and all of that. And who's using a Mac? You're either using it in a very simple mode, I suppose, but really, like, the Mac, as more people just live on their phones, the Mac is the place where complexity happens. So I could make the argument that today's Apple thinks more of the Mac being a power tool and is less distracted by the iPad being the real future of computing than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And that could mean that they make some better decisions about the Mac on the software side, sort of like how they eventually made better hardware decisions with the Mac.
So the problem with personifying Apple in this way is that Apple feels this and Apple feels that, is that it's easier to attribute changes in attitude of the company as personified when the leadership is not exactly the same as it was then. And I know the leadership learns. Again, they had the Mac Roundtable. Johnny Ive did leave, so the leadership's not exactly the same. They did fix stuff, but
The
They
attitude
think,
toward the iPad is very clearly different than it was for whatever reason.
yeah,
I
like,
don't
but
know
I do
why.
kind of feel like at the very highest levels that Tim Cook really wishes the iPad was what's a computer,
I
the what's a
agree.
computer tablet, and he's
I
still the guy
agree.
in charge, and he's had to sort of like grudgingly shift course here, which is fine. Like with the OS stuff, with the look and feel, I guess my biggest, most optimistic hope is at least have them make different mistakes. Like they already did the mistake where they made everything too translucent, and the rumors that they're
Right.
going to do that same mistake again. It's like, come on, like do a different mistake. Like there's plenty of other mistakes you can make, but do a different one. Like Windows has already made the mistake with like the Aero glass look that was too translucent. macOS 10 made it with Aqua, which was too translucent. Vision Pro, it makes sense for it to be translucent because your room is behind it, but adopting that across all their platforms because it looks cool. I hope it does look cool, but just the problems caused by transparency. Can we make a different mistake? There's so many other ones you can make. Please pick a different one.
Well, and my concern now that I'm really vacillating between optimism and pessimism. But like I'm processing. I heard you do it on ATP. We're all kind of processing this, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what do I think about this? My pessimism is, and I hate to bring up that settings app again, but this is my reasoning. When I for a few years I taught web and information design at the graduate school of journalism where I went at UC Berkeley. Um, and I got down deep into information architecture and understanding information design. And so although I'm not a computer interface designer or really a designer at all, I spent a lot of time in products that are design adjacent where the design and the output matters, and I'm supplying the raw content that goes into a thing that is designed. And in in various parts of my career I've been a person involved in making those decisions. So my concern based on what I've seen from Apple is that Apple seems to have some designers and some leadership that are very focused on visual design
Mm-hmm.
and are not focused on information and interaction design. And that's bad because you need all of those things because you need to think about it's sorry to keep coming back to the Steve Jobs things, but it's like design is how it works. It really is not what it looks like. What it looks like matters, but how it works matters. And the things that concern me are, as you mentioned, the settings app is a great example where it looks like the settings app on Apple's other platforms now, but some of the decisions made are counterintuitive. The content isn't organized in any way, which I hate to be the one to say, oh, it's a simple fix. It'll take 15 minutes, but like you could have a better starting
Yeah.
menu
Yeah,
for
when
the
they're moving
settings.
everything, you're already moving everything. Take that
Yes,
opportunity to do
organize
actual
it.
information architecture. Here, now's your
Organize it.
chance. You're going to move everything anyway.
Otherwise, everybody's going to use search, and then you change the search index, it can kind of break it. So now nobody can find anything.
Yeah.
It's not good. So that concerns me. And then it goes down to that interaction level too. I mentioned the sliders instead of checkboxes, which I know you brought up too. Like that's a really great example of what's the problem we're trying to solve here. And it's bad information design to have a toggle that you can't tell how it's toggled.
And also to
It's
move the
just
labels
bad.
much farther away from the toggles, right?
Exactly. So
Because
you
that's
don't know
on the
what it's
phone, they're real close to
regarding.
each other. It's a narrow
Yeah.
screen. On the Mac, oh, we got to make the window bigger, but now my label is
Right.
5 inches from the
So
thing as opposed to a checkbox
so
where it's right next to it.
so my hope is that was all based on a directive, right? Because what we can't read into this is there's a manager somewhere who was told, look, we have to do this, and
Right.
we know it's bad, but we have to do it. It's like, okay, but is that manager? Did that change? Did those marching orders change?
He
Did they get
convinced
the old time
himself.
religion?
Yeah, is he convinced himself that it's actually amazing? Like that was my other complaint about system settings. I
Yeah.
just think the controls don't look attractive either. So if they were concentrating on the look and feel, they failed there. So it's not
Yeah.
attractive. I don't find it nice. I find it just a sea of dark, boring looking gray and text fields that don't look like text fields and labels that are far away from buttons. And that's even before you get to
Yeah.
the information architecture.
'Cause
Just writ small at the
I
visual
would
level. I think it's a failure. So not
I,
optimistic.
I would argue, in fact, that Apple doesn't Apple doesn't need a design refresh. I understand why they feel they must
Yeah, just
because
yeah.
it's fashion, and I get that. But the underlying problem that I think a lot of users, and this includes iPhone users, this includes the most important users to Apple's business, iPhone users. I think, and Gurman does mention this, so maybe there's some hope here again. If we're trying to just hang in there, baby, just hang in there. Is is making it better designed, like from a functional standpoint, making it more intuitive, decreasing complexity, and that's hard. and it's not solved by a coat of new paint, right? So that's the challenge here. Is like it's really, and I really don't want to say it's easy because it's not. This is an incredibly hard problem to solve. So many of Apple's problems and the problems of the tech industry in general about user interface are very hard to solve, because how do you ship new features every year and not have enormous complexity, or have the features just disappear forever and nobody even knows that they're there, which is absolutely where we are with the iPhone. But their problem is about that. It's about usability a lot more than it is about look and feel. And my concern is that it's very much going to be same old Winchester mystery house with a coat of new paint. I'm a little worried.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that, whenever I see like to make it more intuitive, I just have negative feelings immediately because I've never seen that as a description of an interface and had it actually be good. But to that end, and to, the Winchester Mystery House problem or whatever, actually, sort of transitioning to the next topic, there is a technology that could potentially help with that if implemented well.
It's true. Is it artificial intelligence?
No, it's not, but it's LLM, and LLMs can actually help a lot in this area of very focused. Because that's kind of the problem, is like when you have so many features in such a capable phone, it's difficult to design an interface to allow people to access all of them. If only there were something on the phone that could help them in that area without even just experienced users who know exactly which screen it's buried in. Sometimes it's just faster to ask your Apple TV to turn subtitles off, even though you know how to get to the control,
Yeah.
right? So that's and so how's Apple doing in that area?
So the great segue. Thank you. It is. While we were talking in the last segment about interface design, I did think about that, which is, or maybe none of it matters. It doesn't matter. Just ask your computer to do a thing and it does it, and then you walk away and you don't have to worry about it. Which honestly, at this point, if they could nail that, just okay. Like I mean, the settings app is so bad that I would just give up. I'm like, can I just please just do this thing for me? But it is. So we should talk about Apple's various Apple Intelligence and Siri disasters. That's what this segment is. Where that the silver lining of the dark cloud. I can't see it right now. Obviously, they Gruber and I talked about it last week. I caught Gruber sort of like in the middle of his heel turn, of his identity crisis a little bit, where he said he felt bamboozled, and then the more he thought about it, and then he wrote something rotten in Cupertino, and he's calling out like, this is the fact that they made this announcement and didn't really show it and advertised it and then delayed it all because they couldn't get it to work, is certainly a pretty powerful symptom of what feels like we've been witnessing in terms of what Apple is going wrong there. I think I was fascinated this week by some pieces, including one by Ben Thompson, trying to sort of like poke at it a little bit and say, well, what could Apple do that might actually be better at this? And I thought it was a really interesting idea to say, and it goes to Apple's control and it's Apple's desire to be perceived that they had last year for sure as being with it with AI and wanting it to all be about them. And Ben made the point that I think is a great one, and I was thinking of this in a different context last year, but it's still true, which is, what if this was a little more about everyone else? What if Apple hooked the OS more aggressively up to various LLMs, not just ChatGPT, and then built some APIs so that app developers could fairly easily leverage whatever LLM is set up and answer whatever questions that way, especially when Apple's work in this area is struggling. And then separately, the one that I kept thinking of, and I honestly was thinking about it, about Marco and Overcast, but I was thinking about it in other contexts too, which is Apple's stated goal for this product cycle was, we've built an LLM of our own and it's running on your iPhone and iPad and Mac, and developers can't touch it, which I don't know if they want to touch it or not, but like, one way you could make your platform appealing is by saying, your apps now can have features enabled by our on-device LLM. Isn't that great? Here's the API for it. And instead, it was very much like, Apple Intelligence is going to change how you use your computer, change how you use your phone. You can only use our apps.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the pre-LLM incarnation of this on iOS and Apple's other platforms, which was machine learning, ML. I remember the core ML framework that essentially the demo was like, you can make a model or whatever, train a model on how to identify hot dogs. And then you, with Core ML, you can wrap it up in a way that it's usable across all of our platforms. And then you ship your app with your model that you train to identify hot dogs. And across all of your platforms, now you have an app that you've shipped that can identify hot dogs.
Yeah.
And that's cool technology, and that's a great way to let people incorporate machine learning into their apps. But I feel like, from my impression of the apps that are out there, most developers don't want to take a bunch of Python and train a machine learning model on hot dogs and bundle it with their app and ship it and bloating the size of their app. And they just want there to be a framework on iOS that can identify hot dogs, just to give a silly example.
Yeah.
Like OS level, platform level integration of technologies is so much easier for third parties to adopt in their apps. It's great that they can ship their own thing. Like, if someone, I haven't read Ben Thompson's thing yet, but if someone's hearing this and saying, well, that's dumb, people can do that now. People can ship an LLM with their app now. It's like, okay, how big do you want your app to be? And do you want 7 different apps, each with their own model that, by the way, can't run in the background because it'll get killed because it's too damn big? Like, this is something that the platform has to supply for you. They just give me one or two of them in a framework that I can use, so I don't have to ship it with my app.
To use your hot dog example, which I really love, so I'm going to run with it. The Photos app probably can identify hot dogs. And if not, I mean, it can identify lots of things. And I don't believe there is an API that lets you hand an image to the system and have it run through what the Photos app does and spit back a whole bunch of things that are describing what that image is.
They do have things where you can identify faces and stuff, so some of the Photos app stuff is exposed, but like, and we're talking about all like pre-LLM, machine learning, but
this is ML,
it comes down to the same thing. The capability to bundle that with your app is great and needs to exist for people on the cutting edge, but most people just want to be able to use a OS framework that they don't have to ship, that they don't have to train, that Apple makes better every year after year, that uses all of the hardware on the phone, to the greatest extent.
Let me give you the example I was thinking of about Overcast, and this is not endorsed by Marco, okay? Not endorsed by Marco, but I walked through the process where I thought, okay, I use Whisper on my Mac to do transcriptions. It's amazing. The latest one on this M4 Max MacBook Pro that I've got, it's transcribing it like, I forget what it is, 30x. Like, it's wild. I did last week's podcast with Gruber, which lasted like 10 hours, and it transcribed it in like 5 minutes. It was amazing. But so podcast transcripts, Apple is doing podcast transcripts up in the cloud. They are literally consuming every podcast that's in Apple Podcasts in a bunch of different languages and generating a transcript and showing it. Now, Marco is not going to do that, right? He's not going to be able to build an enormous cloud system that does that. He just can't. That Overcast is not going to be able to do that. Guess what? Overcast is running on a bunch of devices with neural engines that are pretty powerful. And you could build a system that generated a transcript and maybe even intelligently check to see if there was a transcript available. Right. If there isn't, you transcribe it and upload it to Overcast, at which point that transcript is available for everybody else who uses Overcast. It's distributed transcription. You could do that. That would be pretty cool. However, for that really to be enabled, there needs to be a model that Marco could use that is run on the system, because if he tries to build it into his app will just get killed. But the power of being able to say, for any app developer, not just Marco, for any app developer to say, oh, look at these great ML, AI, whatever, APIs that I can use that are provided by being on an iPhone or being on a Mac. And that makes my app so much better because it's the system one and it's reliable and it's right there and I can use it. But with Apple Intelligence, and I think for expediency reasons more than anything else, Apple was like, we got to ship something. Let's just put our model on there and some apps will use it and that'll be it. But that's why I think Ben Thompson's suggestion is a smart one, which is, while you're having all these problems, what if you enabled your app developers to take advantage of your platform and your neural engine and all these great things you've done to make their apps better so that iPhone apps are good? Like that, it seems simple, but I think there's something to it, and I have thought there was something to it since last June, because it felt very much like Apple was like, they do the "we can't wait to see what you do with it" thing. That, not Apple Intelligence, really. I mean, it's just not. There was no, for a developer conference, there was, other than the Xcode code completion stuff, there was no developer message for Apple Intelligence.
Other than to prepare your apps to be harvested But they said, like, make
Yes.
sure you set up your app
Yes.
intents, make sure we can get at your stuff, make sure you know what
Yeah.
your apps can do. But someday in the
Atomize your
future,
apps.
our LLM will be issuing commands to control your app and extracting information of it. So there's
Yeah.
two parts of this. Like, one, the basic one that you just mentioned before, like that Apple has this control issue. That we're stuck in a situation. My pet example, because it is relevant to one of the apps that I make, is Stage Manager. Stage Manager is a different new way to handle multiple applications on both the Mac and iPad. Stage Manager is one idea of how that could be done. I always felt like it should have been possible for a third party to make Stage Manager. There should be APIs involving the windowing system on both the iPad and on the Mac. Good, safe APIs that Apple vends that you can use so that third parties can say, oh, I have an idea about managing Windows. Let me try this. And then let a million third parties take their crack at it. It doesn't mean Apple can't also have a crack at it. But if you make APIs that allow, if you make your system, extensible in that way, I mean, Apple had to make the APIs for Stage Manager, and it's way harder to make them public. But still, that is a good discipline to do for APIs like that. We didn't do that. So what we were stuck with window management, we just sit out here waiting around to see what the next idea Apple has is. And we're in the same situation with Apple Intelligence. Obviously, it's way less dire within window management because every idea Apple has ever had, especially on the Mac, still exists on the Mac for the most part. They just keep adding them, which is like, okay, fine. But like, boy, imagine Apple if this was no longer your sole responsibility. Imagine if you empowered third parties to try out a bunch of stuff and then just steal the best idea and put it into the operating system, for crying out loud, right? And so we're in the same situation with AI. It's like we're stuck out here waiting for Apple to do it. Now, the second aspect of the AI thing, which makes it more difficult, is a lot of the things that Apple has announced for Apple Intelligence. And the reason I think most of us, when we saw their announcement, said this is a good strategy for Apple, this is a good idea, is it leverages Apple's strengths. They do have lots of information on device. They do have powerful hardware on device. Apple Intelligence's strategy of not being like, we just have a thing in the cloud and you talk to it. It's like, no, this thing runs on your device. It's going to make a semantic index of all your stuff, and it's going to control your apps that you already have, that app developers are already vending through app intents. Like, that's a good idea. Making that available to third parties is extremely difficult because you would essentially be giving third parties access to data across multiple applications on your phone. It would know everything about you. It'd be able to, like, because that's what Apple Intelligence would do, and we trust Apple to do that. Now you're saying, oh, if I make this pluggable to third parties will be able to see all my text messages, all my emails, all my contacts, all, it's just like, it's incredibly invasive. So it's even more against Apple's like philosophy, more against Apple's sort of inclination to say, well, we can never do that. Only Apple can provide Apple Intelligence because we would never trust a third party to that. They feel that way about window management. Only Apple can manage Windows because we would never trust a third party to do that. God forbid they knew what size and position your windows are in, right? It's like, it's just so against what they want to do as an institution. And I understand the pushback internally about doing that in Apple Intelligence, but that's not what we were just talking about. We were like, okay, fine, just let Marco do transcriptions of audio that he has that he uploads. He's already got that audio. There's no privacy implication here. It's like CloudKit. Yes, developers could make their own servers with their own data store and their own database, but if you provide CloudKit and it actually works and it's decent, people will just use that, and wow, now it's way easier to make that app on the phone than it is on another platform, and their apps are better for it if you did a good job with CloudKit, right?
Because there is a speech-to-text, for example, engine on iOS.
Right, but it's not the same as transcribe these podcasts. It's not the same as, hey, let me check this giant MP3 over the wall. Oh, looks like you already transcribed it. Yeah. Wow.
And that's one example, but like but larger, it's just like there should be a ideally robust set of APIs that allow app developers to have access to these models that are running on the device that Apple, and again, from a battery standpoint, from a power consumption standpoint, that Apple and the system is able to prioritize and say, this is going to run slower because of the state that I'm in right now. Whereas if you put it in your app, Apple's just going to kill it when it.
Yeah, or
like
just
that
like
app is out of control.
The apps all have this screen that says, leave your screen on, plug your phone in.
Yeah, it play breakout.
Prevent screen sleep from going, like just all the things that third party. I think of the times when I was using a third party app that would essentially analyze your photos, so you could type in hot dog and it'll find all the hot dog pictures way before Apple did it. And to get that thing to index your photos required plugging your phone in and letting the app be there, and the app would prevent the screen from sleeping, and it would just sit there for hours grinding away to get the results. When Apple built it in, I don't have to do that anymore. I just use my phone normally and it indexes my photos
in the background and it controls it. And I know it could be frustrating sometimes where it's like, why hasn't it indexed it yet? But that's the reason why, is that it's looking at your battery and your plugged in status and all of those things, and a more robust selection of this. And again, I think we have to look at everything they announced last June as a function of panic, right? I think they are worried that they were caught flat-footed. They were seen as behind. They
Right.
were behind. And what if? And this is the part I know there are a lot of real skeptics out there. What if it completely changes the game? And if you're Apple and you've got the most valuable company in the world, you really want to eliminate as many changes the games without it being us who
Yeah.
changes the game as possible. And they got really scared. And that is why they made some bad decisions, including, like I said last week, lowering the bar on what they were going to announce in terms of the probability that it would ship in the cycle, because they wanted to make a big push, right? The whole thing was make a big splash. And they did make a big splash, and there is blowback now. And I guess we can debate whether the big splash was enough to get by, even though now they're dealing with the blowback. But the truth is, this WWDC is going to be so interesting, because what happens when you're not in panic mode? You've had a year to consider, you've had a year to learn, but you've also failed at a bunch of stuff, and people on the outside are going to look at you with a more skeptical eye because you didn't deliver everything you promised. I do wonder. I hope to see them having learned something from
Yeah,
this. That
I
my
think
worry is that they won't.
one of the things I think is saving them here is that uh, the most optimistic promises of what LLM based technology would be delivering by this point in time have not been met. Not to say that they're not
Yeah,
useful; they are. They're very useful, and Apple is behind, and other people are doing better things with them. But they have been saved by the fact that even if everything that they announced worked perfectly and or was replaced with the best in the entire industry, it's like this seems like a good addition to the phone, but it's not replacing the phone or taking away their power as a platform. Or it's like, you don't need a phone, you just need an AI pin, and that's all you need. Nope, that didn't happen
right.
either. So like,
Google and Samsung have not shipped phones with technology. I know people are like, oh, but it does this thing great. It's like, the truth is, people don't look and say, I can't buy an iPhone because it
yeah,
doesn't have all the things that Google or Samsung. And that's what Apple's worried about. And Apple doesn't even need to be, I know it doesn't sound like Apple, it sounds more like Samsung, but Apple doesn't need to be first. Apple just needs to be close enough. There needs to be as little daylight between them and everybody else as possible. And one of the most positive stories of the last year in terms of AI is it sure seems like AI is much more of a commodity than it was before.
yeah.
And that's good for Apple, because if Apple can either just build it themselves and it's basically as good as anyone else's, then that's great for Apple. If Apple offers various LLMs from other companies because they're all just commodified, and it's like, sure, you want to use, you got a GPT account, you got a Google account, you got a Claude account, what, we don't care, whatever, then that's good for Apple, because Apple's building a layer up from there, doing their secret sauce stuff on top of those great models that other people are building. Either way, that's good for Apple. But despite I would say a much more favorable environment over the last year, they are stumbling. I think they're stumbling because of the decisions made not in the last year, but before that, when they got caught flat-footed and put this crash program together to generate Apple Intelligence. And that's why I'm so fascinated by the idea of the course correction, because yeah, they are messing this up, and yet the conditions are still really favorable for them to get their act together.
Yeah, yeah. Like I feel like the sort of hockey stick graph things of like, well, by 2025, you don't even need a phone. It'll just be an AI, and it will artificially render things to a dumb screen that you hold in your hand, and it will render apps in real time, and there won't even be apps. It'll just be like a thing. It's like that has not come to pass. So like the
No.
things that Apple was afraid of that would essentially make their platform moot, not moot, but like do to them what the iPhone did to the PC, right? That's what they're afraid of, right? That it still exists and it's still important, but the new most important thing is no longer the phone. Now it's the AI pin, or now it's phones that are essentially tiny little AI things with the screen. And the path towards that, if we are even on that path, has stalled out, and LLMs are like, this is an important, useful piece of technology that you have to be good at because it's going to enhance your phone and you have to have it. But nobody is in a situation where this like LLMs, like OpenAI, is not going to put Samsung and Apple, dethrone them as important hardware makers of phones or something. Like, that's like, oh, well, that's great. Remember when Apple was important because
Right.
they made iPhones, but all everyone cares about is the OpenAI pin now. Nope. And it doesn't seem like they're on that path. So yeah, it definitely seems like a technology that there's a lot of competition in, but that it's it's like desktop publishing or the web or the internet. The internet was so incredibly important, and yet it did not make the personal computer no longer relevant. And if anything, it made it more
Right.
relevant.
Well, and you could argue that again, unless there is a moat somewhere, unless Google comes up with something that allows them to completely make an AI powered version of Android that means that the iPhone is irrelevant and Apple has nothing to contribute, because that's the
Yeah.
fear, right? Is there whatever comes next, Apple has nothing to contribute, whether it's which I would argue, given how they're doing in the hardware on the hardware side, I have a
They'll
hard time
always have
seeing
something
it.
to contribute.
Yeah. So even, and it would hurt their pride, right? It would hurt their pride if they became more of a hardware and layer company on somebody else's model. They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But that, I feel like that is probably their worst case scenario. Knowing what we know right now about AI, is it's hard to imagine a scenario where one company does this and nobody else cracks it.
Yeah.
And even then, I would argue, in a scenario where there was one company, if let's say Google figures it out, I think even Google would be like, yeah, you can do this on the iPhone too, because
Because
it's like, no, no, no,
they just want your eyeballs and your ad dollars.
yeah, and that would be, Apple wouldn't love that, but also there's all the competitors to Google. So I think that lack of a moat here means that in the end, Apple does need to catch up. They need to get their act together. But in the long run, when we talk about layering, putting things underneath apps, creating APIs that connect your great iPhone and app experience with whatever AI technology is relevant, if they can do that part, it doesn't really matter about how far behind or ahead they are in terms of their LLMs, because the assumption here is that nobody ultimately is going to be very far behind, because we saw with DeepSeek, the lesson that at least we're trying to take from DeepSeek is it's not as hard as it seems to catch up. And once the genie is out of the bottle, it's out of the bottle for everybody. And that's actually good for Apple, because when you're behind and you're
Yeah.
struggling to catch up, if somebody tells you don't worry, it's easy to catch up. We've rubber banded it. It's like Mario Kart. I know you're in the back, but guess what? Good news. That's what I think that it's potentially good for Apple, but they have to execute, and that is, I think, the real kind of gnashing of teeth that's happened over the last week. Is it feels like Apple has, they set ambitious goals, they did it last minute, but if we look at the last 9 months of what they've shipped, it shows that it was last minute and slapped together and overly ambitious, and that they couldn't do it, and that's worrisome.
Yeah, LMs kind of remind me of like most sort of technological innovations, where like they're founded on scientific papers that anybody can read. It was a breakthrough in a technique to do a thing that they had been trying to do with different techniques earlier, and said, well, here I have a new way to do it. Everyone can see those papers. It's kind of like the integrated circuit in the transistor, right? Anyone could make a chip, a CPU, memory, like that whole revolution of the personal computer revolution. There was no one who has we're the only people who know how to make an integrated circuit, so we're going to take over the world. It's like, no, everybody knows how to make them. And what turned out to be the moat was like, Microsoft's platform deal with IBM and their integration
Yeah.
with Intel as a the Intel Windows duopoly. It had nothing to do with no one else knows how to make a personal computer. There was lots of competition, and their moat was involving business deals, that some of which turned out to be illegal, and a bunch of stuff like. And in that respect, Apple's looking like the Microsoft of today, of like, oh, they've got all the terrible draconian control over their platform and a stranglehold on all these devices. Not the same way Microsoft did, but like the moat has nothing to do with no one else knows how to make a CPU. And now, arguably, you just mentioned like Apple's hardware, like they're actually really good at that. That potentially comes from the fact that they've made so much money by controlling the App Store that they can pay for the best process from TSMC, and that's what gives them the hardware moat. But also, like, the intangibles we talked about in ATP of, anybody can make a PC, but who can make a really good customer-pleasing PC? If you're given all the same parts, we all got the same CPUs, hard drives, memory, cases, blah, blah, blah. Now go. Who can make one that's pleasing? Apple's been historically pretty good at making products that please customers, that are desirable, using things that everybody else has access to. That's true of the iPhone. That's true of all the Macs that they make. There's no, other than Apple Silicon, which arguably Apple has shown is not that big of a deal, because for many, many years, Apple was not the hardware leader when it came to CPU performance. And still, Macs were very desirable and in the news and popular computers and seen as the best in the industry, even when they were a minuscule market share. So most of the advantages Apple have seem pretty durable. They're either Microsoft-style business terribleness that we hate, but nevertheless gives them an advantage, or they're Apple's traditional strengths of they make good, tasteful choices, assembling the pieces that are available to everybody. And in the LLM realm, everything that has happened has been open for everybody, including like the DeepSeek thing. They were open about what they did. They said, we just have a new twist on doing the stuff that you were doing, but we can do it cheaper, and here's how we did it. Now everybody knows that. So like only in the movies is there like I've got the secret formula and nobody has it. Most technological revolutions, the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, the integrated circuit, everybody gets access to that tech.
Yeah.
It's just a question of who can execute with the best combination of things that give them an advantage. And very often the advantages are not fair. Microsoft's advantages in that era were not fair. Apple's advantages, arguably with the App Store, are quote unquote not fair. But those are durable advantages, as are just, being a good company that makes products that people want.
And that's why the Ben Thompson argument holds a lot of water for me, is the idea that how does Apple, in a world where the LLMs are just kind of out there, what is your advantage that keeps you on top? And their hardware is part of it, but being a platform that's really good to take advantage of all of that is probably more important than like, do we have it? Because everybody's going to have it. That's not enough. It's what do you do with it? And if they can add their own secret sauce in some places, that's great. But also allowing the developers and their ecosystem to use the power of this stuff, because Google will probably do that. And like, again, it's competition, and they just don't want to be on the other side of it. So they're going to have to.
Yeah, and some of the advantages that Apple has, they are essentially a stable platform. They've had customers for a long time. They don't change things in a way that breaks stuff that often. They have the customers that are the most willing to spend money. Like it's already an extremely attractive place to do whatever it is you're going to do with computers and LLMs or whatever. And so it should be easy for them to continue to make this a good, safe place for you to launch your new service or app that is powered by LLM stuff, because they have just so many other surrounding advantages. And their sort of refusal to open up to that, but instead say, just wait to see what we do, it'll be great, is not working well for them.
This episode of Upgrade is brought to you by Delete Me. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal information from data broker websites. They know your privacy is worth protecting. Sign up and provide the information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. And it's not just a one-time service. Delete Me is always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. Mike definitely likes to tell the story about how his wife Adina was like, I don't like the stuff that's out there on the internet. Can you get it off? And like, this is not like somebody wrote something mean tweets about me. It's more like they know where you live. They've posted your ID number, social security number, phone number, information about you that makes it easier for people to pose as you and do phishing attacks. There's so many things that are out there that there is a mechanism, if you know it, and the people at Delete Me know it, to get that stuff cleared out so that it's not there for bad actors to find. Take control of your data. Keep your private life private. Sign up for Delete Me now at a special discount for Upgrade listeners. You can get 20% off of your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/upgrade20 and use the promo code upgrade20 at checkout. The only way to get 20% off. Go to joindeleteme.com/upgrade20 and enter code upgrade20 at checkout. Once again, joindeleteme, all one string.com. You know how to spell .com /upgrade20, and the code is upgrade20. Thank you to Delete Me for supporting Upgrade. So, John, this Siri report from Mark Gurman also adds into the overall narrative, I guess. This is he obviously has people who are on the Siri team who are in that meeting who just recorded and transcribed or whatever and just leaked the whole thing to him, which is, it's a little like those stories about like Facebook has a big meeting and they're like, okay, nobody leak this, and 5 minutes later, nobody leak this, says Facebook at meeting, because it immediately leaks. This is Robbie Walker, who's apparently the senior director in charge of Siri. He did an all-hands meeting where he said the delays were ugly and embarrassing, but he also said that, marketing is partially at fault for doing ads about these features. And on one level, he's right. On another level, who gave ad marketing and advertising the confidence that this feature would be implemented? I mean, maybe Robbie Walker was like, "No, don't do it. We can't do it. No." But probably he was like, "Yeah, we could do it," and sweating a little bit, and it's so like, who gave him the idea that they could advertise these features? I do wonder that. Um, and Gurman's report says it's unlikely to result in management changes on Tim Cook's executive team. That would mean admitting fault, which Apple hates doing. Boy, I hear that. Right? That's hard. It's hard to
No,
admit
you can
fault.
make leadership changes without admitting fault. They get rid of people all the time and never admit fault. How many different people
Yeah.
have been involved of head of Apple retail, the paper master guy with the CPU thing?
Yeah.
Like they don't admit fault, but they
Look,
still make changes.
Scott Forstall just wanted to spend more time producing plays.
Yeah.
Okay. It is, look, a lot of people are interpreting this in ways that suggest that they've never been at a big
Yeah.
corporation and
Yeah.
been in an all hands meeting, right? Because, like, you know what they don't do in an all hands meeting?
Yell
What they
at you.
don't do is say, "You guys
You
all
suck."
blew it. I hate you all. You're lucky to have jobs. Maybe some of you will get fired. You in particular blew this. You in particular blew that. I don't even know what I'm doing here. You guys are a bunch of rejects." Like, that is not what happens. Instead, it's sort of like, "Oh, I know it's bad out there, and I know there have been some missteps, but it's not just us. It's a whole bunch of people, and we're going to work together, and we're gonna figure this out." The difficulty is that everybody on the outside looks at this and goes, "Really? You gave a pep talk to the Siri team?"
Yeah.
Because
So
Siri's just such a wayward.
I think
feature.
it might have been one or two ADB episodes ago, but I think I grabbed the exact same analogy that Gruber grabbed in his article, and I think I was also talking about the same thing, which was the Siri team, which is the famous mobile me meeting where Steve Jobs did his classic Steve Jobs is a giant jerk thing, where he asks questions of what mobile me is supposed to do and listens patiently for the answer and says, "Then why the F doesn't it do that?" And then he yells at them all and tells them they're a bunch of rejects. Steve Jobs is a jerk. And like Greer even put in his article that like what the Siri teams need is not the like what is a participation award type of thing of like saying, "Oh, you tried your best," or whatever.
You tried.
What the team needs is for leadership to tell them they're a bunch of losers. I disagree with that.
No.
I don't think. Yeah, Steve Jobs did do that. Doesn't mean it's good leadership. It's a thing that he did, and he was a jerk.
Yep.
He had
was.
other qualities that made up for that, but don't do that. Because if you actually like, it doesn't mean put on the blinders and say, "Oh, we're great in everything." Like, there's a way. Again, if you've worked in a big company, there's a way for leadership to say, "We have not, we're not working up to expectations. We should hold ourselves to higher standards," but not say that in a way that is viscerally satisfying to outside observers who want to see the Siri team get yelled at, right?
Yeah.
That's leadership. Leadership is letting people know that we have to do better, but also not berating them and shoving their dog in the poo they made on the carpet, shoving the dog's nose in the poo they made on the carpet, which, by the way, is also not good for dogs. So this is authoritarian mindset that wants to see the people who did the bad thing punished and yelled at.
Yeah,
May
it's the
feel
2
good on
minutes
the
hate.
outside.
2 minutes hate for Siri.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
It may feel good to think that's happening, but that's not what leadership looks like. And Steve Jobs is a poor example to model here. But I do agree that, I mean, honestly, like, do you think there's anybody on the Siri team who thinks that their product is awesome at this point?
Nobody. This is the thing, and this is why it's complex. And I know that people have very strong feelings about this, but nobody knows the weaknesses of Siri like the Siri team, right?
Especially the rank and file, right?
They know, and that's what I was going to say is, look, given everything, wave hands at like given everything about Siri, obviously there's a problem. But what is the problem? I don't believe the problem is that the engineers aren't working hard enough and don't know what they're doing.
Exactly,
I don't believe it.
For sure.
It is at this point, I would say clearly a deeply structural problem at Apple. And that's why it's hard to change, because, I mean, I put in our notes, I actually like this whole sequence that's happened in this last week, because Apple needs to have a struggle and a challenge, because Apple's been riding so high for so long that they're like, why change? Why should we ever change anything we do? We're so awesome. And I feel like the LLM thing was like the start of the humbling moment, but I feel like maybe this week we've really got the humbling moment, which is, if you look at Siri, it's not the people who are working on it. It is whoever decided. It's either whoever decided, "Oh no, this is our strategy," and it failed, and they gave the wrong marching orders. Or my gut feeling, John, is this is a fundamental structural problem at Apple where the people who are in charge of the various parts of implementation or budgeting made some decisions about Siri where it's like, well, we could completely throw it away, but why don't we patch it? We'll kick the can down the road, and we could. I need more money, and they're like, well, we got this other thing on the OS side. We're not going to give you more money for the Siri team. Whatever the reason, and unless you're inside Apple, you don't know the reason. But it feels to me like this is a fundamental structural problem in Apple, not a couple of lazy people in the Siri programming team, right? It's a structural problem. And the problem with that is, for a structural problem to be fixed, you must admit that it exists. And that means high-level people admitting that either they blew it or the power structure that gives them some power is not how the structure should be, and that some people may need to lose power and authority and budget in order to give somebody else power and authority and budget in order to make this work better. And it's that famous line, like, nothing makes somebody commit to a bad idea like their job depending on it. Or, sorry for the paraphrase, Charles Dickens or whoever that was.
Upton Sinclair convincing someone of something when the job depends on not understanding it.
That sounds like him. But that's, you have to depend on misunderstanding it. And my gut feeling is that's where this is. This is Apple, for all of the success Apple has had with some of its structures. And I've said this about Steve Jobs' whole rebuild of their corporate culture. For all the success it led to, there are little corners of it where you're like, ooh, that's actually kind of ugly. And that's why Apple has these warts in various places. And so that's when I look at this from the outside, again, it's like we could kick Robbie Walker, we could kick at the Siri team, but he's just trying to pump up a team that's probably deeply demoralized about all of this. And my guess is it's not any of their fault. And so let's fire somebody. But my guess is that it's got to be up at the Tim level, really, to say, why have we failed at this? And that takes somebody admitting they failed at it, which I think Apple has a hard time admitting, especially modern Apple.
Yeah, so the Siri situation makes some vague sense, and whatever. It's an acquisition. Was it Forstall found this company in 20 whatever, and says we should get this. It's a cool thing. It should have on our phone, and they roll it out, and it does some stuff, but it's not great. It doesn't set the world on fire. People like it. Eventually, voice assistants become more common. Apple's like, well, great. We've already got one of those. We were one of the early voice assistants, but it is part of the iPhone. But it's not a part that's driving sales. And for all the efforts of the Siri team to improve it over the years, I think Apple's just started to see it as this is just the price of admission. You need to have a thing on your phone that is like Siri. We have one of those. And so we're basically fine. Just put this on autopilot, right? Then LLMs come along and it's we probably should have been awake earlier, because even things like Amazon's voice assistant were kicking our butt. But it's we're fine. They're not a big differentiator. What we have is fine. And all of a sudden they are going to be a big differentiator. And you can't turn the organization on a dime like that, because you're not built to treat this part of your operating system as strategically important as it has suddenly become. So you can just tell the existing team and the existing structure, do the better thing that other people are doing now. And it's well, that's not... This team, for how long, since 2011, has been sort of a thing that you need to have, but that isn't probably going to get that much better. And, we've heard stories from inside the Siri team in years before the LLM of warring factions within. It's this team has a new idea of how we can overhaul Siri, and this team has a different idea about how we can overhaul Siri. And let's pit them against each other and pick the one that wins. And whatever ones they were picking were not the right ones, and that didn't put them in a good position now to say, oh, and by the way, LLMs exist. Reimagine Siri in light of current technology. The organization is not equipped to do that, but that is their task. Their task is to, I talked about this in ATP, its task is to do what Amazon claims to have done, which is reimagine our voice assistant for the LLM age. And Alexa has been around for ages and has huge numbers of capabilities, and must have been an incredible project to say, start over, do a new thing based on LLMs, and they claim that they're shipping this month or so. Apple has barely even tried to claim that they're going to do what Amazon says that they've done. That's a task that's before them. And so it just seems like a structural problem that is going to be difficult for them to solve. And also, I don't think Apple is yet entirely convinced. If you asked the big leadership at Apple, how much more important has Siri become now that LLMs exist? Strategically for our platform, obviously it's more important than it was. Is it the most important thing? Has it just moved up a little bit and it's like a tie with like some other function? Like it's just, I don't know if they're ready to turn. I mean, I bet they would say, "Well, we did. We hired the Google AI guy years ago, and so we think we're giving it the appropriate amount of attention." And as you said, all we see is what you're producing. What you're producing is not competitive. You are not
Yeah,
producing what you're producing. Stuff is not competitive, and you don't even have like the most optimistic plans. Still have you behind everybody else. And by the way, we haven't even seen what that's going to produce. So if you think you've appropriately turned the dial on structurally and budget and everything for Siri, the outside world is telling you it's not the most important thing in the world, but it's way more important than you're treating it. And the organization you have now is not capable of doing it. And that has nothing to do with anybody in that all hands meeting who's listening, except for maybe one or two of the people up on the stage, but probably not even them, because it's not like they get to decide how much money they get versus how much money the car project gets versus how much money Vision Pro gets, right? That's not, they can lobby for the resources they think they need, but in the end, their career depends on them saying that they can deliver something that they think they can deliver without asking for 10 times the budget.
yeah. I also suspect that something you just said was right, which is I don't think Siri has been prioritized. I think that they talk a good game and they market it, and there's not a sporting event that goes by where there isn't a, oh, ask Siri who the leader in home runs is or whatever. My gut feeling, just as an outside observer, is that Siri isn't well funded, and that part of this is like it's suddenly become this incredibly important thing, but they are dealing with years of neglect. And one of my examples of this, it's not just that Siri is kind of dumb; it's that Shortcuts is Siri. That's the Siri group that does Shortcuts. They
Mm-hmm.
bought Workflow. The Siri group bought it. And then Apple says, okay, Shortcuts is the future of automation on all of our platforms, which is great. There's a lot to like about Shortcuts. But well, especially the greatest fans of Shortcuts would tell you that for a core part of the operating systems of one of the biggest companies in the world, it feels like 5 people,
Yeah.
3 people, 2 people are working on it. The app is a mess. It hasn't really advanced very much. Um, it's fine, but it's rickety. It breaks during every beta. It just feels like there's not a lot of love on Shortcuts. And then all of a sudden, Siri and Shortcuts, because of App Intents, have become like a major tenet of the future of Apple's platforms. And that's great. And I hope it got them more money, more resources. But they also have to deal with the last 5 years of not really getting a whole lot of love and a whole lot of patience. Or the money got poured into a research project that didn't pan out, and they're left in maintenance mode over on the other side. We can't decide that, but it's a mess, and it's led to, and here's the thing, I think it's just a lack of vision. I think it's a lack of vision at Apple, thinking everything is okay, believing that because they're Apple, everything is going to work out okay. When you look at AirPods, you think about maybe the Apple equivalent of the Meta Ray-Bans, you think about CarPlay, you think about it's not just the novelty of talking to your phone. It's about all of the smart home devices,
Mm-hmm.
including apparently this new smart home screen thing that they were supposed to have shipped that was going to require app intents that haven't shipped. So that product probably can't ship. But like, yeah, I think there was a lack of understanding about exactly how far behind they were on Siri, a lack of prioritization of it, and then one of those oh no moments when they realized the LLM thing was happening was, oh no, it's also a chatbot, and it puts us to shame. And I got to say again, the LLM chatbots aren't good. They're impressive, but they say a lot of stupid things, and yet they are vastly better than Siri. Like even so, they are
Yeah.
vastly better than Siri. Even though, and they're bad. I think they're bad. I use them I ask them questions, and I'm like, oh man, you just completely made that up, and that's really bad. And yet, they're better than Siri. So like, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but it is not because Mary over in the corner there has been working at home 3 days a week, and we think she's kind of slacking off on her Siri work. That is not what's going on here. This is people with bigger salaries than Mary who have made some bad decisions, and I think it goes to the top.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty being an armchair quarterback outside of organizational structures. All we can know is that there's something not working, and we can make guesses
Yeah,
about why. But like,
but we
we
don't know.
can't actually. Anyone who has a strong opinion of exactly who's responsible, unless you work for Apple, even if you do work for Apple, you probably don't know that because you just see your
Not
little
unless you're.
world where your boss's boss makes some dumb decisions,
Yeah.
but you don't understand that their boss actually was the real source of that dumb
No.
decision. And yeah, that's what leading a company means. You have to, correct these things. And to be fair to Tim Cook, I think he, as shown by him hiring the wrong people and then firing them quickly afterwards, he does eventually figure out that things are wrong. I just don't know where the blame lies here, other than it's clear that they haven't given this the attention that it needs to get, whether that's personnel attention or money attention or both, and they already started out behind. And so we're seeing the obvious result of that, which is they are not able to put out things that are competitive because of the decisions they made years and years ago. That's the way this stuff works, right? If they made bad decisions about manufacturing CPUs, they'd be in the same situation. But they made good decisions there and
Yeah.
poor ones here, and like these are decisions that you can't turn around on a dime. So it's even if they're doing everything right now, still it's going to be years before they right this ship.
Yeah. It's like I said, I like that this is happening in the sense that I feel like Apple needs to take some punches, right? I feel like they have been riding high for so long. And I always card out the famous John Madden expression because I love it, which is winning is a great deodorant. As long as
Mm-hmm.
you're winning, all of those things that are going on that stink and you can't smell them.
That,
And
that's why
then,
Siri got to be the way it was. Like
yeah,
Siri exists and
the
supposedly does
iPhone's a
some
huge
things,
hit and
but
Siri's there. So who
right,
cares?
yeah, we have one and we're doing great. So it must mean Siri's great. Nope, didn't
Yeah.
mean that at all. It just
And it
meant you had one.
creates organizational delusions because everybody's job depends on them misunderstanding what's going on.
Yeah.
And so on that level, if you're somebody who wants Apple to do better, Apple getting a black eye in public and having to make, like, how much did they hate having to say we're not going to ship that? So
Mm-hmm.
much that they loaded that one sentence at the beginning of the statement with just the most ridiculous hyperbole about how amazing Apple is
Right.
before they said, but that being said, we are not shipping that feature. And then they use like in the coming year, which nobody knows what it means,
Yep.
but they're
Yep.
not going to say. Like
Some year
that
that
is
comes later.
they hate that. They hate it. They hate it. They are a very proud company. They hate any sign of weakness like that. And so obviously this is painful for them. And again, we saw it in Robbie Walker trying to give his team a pep talk, right? Like, I get it. I totally get it. You hope, really what I hope above everything else is that people at the very top of the company, and this goes all the way to Tim, use this as an opportunity to dig down and say, why did this happen? Because obviously at some point in the chain, everybody was like, going great, boss, going great. We're going to do it.
Yeah,
It's going to be great.
there's some
And
people
it
who are too
wasn't.
successful at managing up somewhere in this chain.
Yes. And so you got to dig it out. And that's very painful. And again, it may lead to somebody getting fired, but probably, my guess is probably not, unless there's gross incompetence somewhere. My guess is it was, this person had this incentive and this person had this incentive.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized, oh, that completely ruined us for Siri because they were working in opposite and there was nobody to say, you guys need to work together on this, right? Like they just,
Yeah.
that's probably what the cause is, but somebody's got to get in there with a flashlight and figure it out because, they let that sit there until Siri became a disaster. Look, there could be gross incompetence. Somebody could be like, embezzling money and like I don't know, but probably the most likely scenario is just it's a large organization that didn't need to understand what it was doing wrong until it got punched in the face, which it did last week. Really quickly, I wanted to talk about because this show is on Mondays and the embargo was on Tuesday morning. My review of the MacBook Air and the Mac Studio. I know you guys have talked about that on ATP a bunch. I just wanted to say I wrote a review. It's called Am I Blue? No, I'm asking. I'm asking. Am I blue?
Budabadi.
Oh no. Get Elliot Kalin in here. Here's the thing that I really like about that. Like, look, John, you know this from your big review days of OS 10. Writing a review is a challenge. It's more of a challenge when there's less to say. And so I have a lot of these Apple products that are so iterative. I've started to just think, I'm going to really write an essay about thoughts that are tangentially related or prompted by the release of a new product, because it's very hard to do a lot more than that when the product hasn't changed very much, and neither of these products changed very much. But the one thing that I landed on with the Air, and I hinted at this with Gruber last week, but again, I couldn't talk about the piece like that I had it, is the most important thing about this product, I think, is the price. I think that they finally got the brand new MacBook Air with 16 gigs of RAM down to $999, which is, where they want that product all along, but they couldn't afford it with the M2 and the M3. And it makes it really easy for me if somebody says, "Oh, I need to buy my kid a Mac for college or whatever," like, just get them a MacBook Air. Like, it's not just get them a MacBook Air. It is back to being kind of the default. I don't have to say, well, save a little money, get the M2, or, well, the older design, but it's still pretty good, is the M1. Like, I don't have to do any of that anymore. I can really just say the M4 at $999 is more than, I would argue, probably like more than 98% of Mac users need. It is just the Mac to buy, I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as with any exercise in finding and eliminating bottlenecks, as soon as you do that, the next bottleneck appears, because whatever is the second biggest thing. So now they've eliminated just so many things. You mentioned the price, 16 gigs of RAM. This is a great design. It's got MagSafe back on it. It's got all these things going for it. And by being so successful in correcting past mistakes and removing bottlenecks, now 256 gig SSD is sitting
Storage,
there saying, "Here I am.
storage space.
I'm the tall
Yep.
poppy. I'm the problem. I'm the long line on the graph." But still, like, unlike the RAM, storage has the advantage that, like, there are people who are fine with that. Like, you can say that it's easier to. I mean, it's easier to extend storage. You can add storage like you can't add RAM. And 256, if you're using it mostly as sort of like a terminal for cloud-based things or whatever, that won't affect you in the way that RAM would. Because you keep opening up those Chrome tabs and you keep doing more complicated things, the RAM's going to be a problem. But the storage space you're not going to need much more of it if you open up 75 new Chrome tabs. So yeah, they've come. They're really, really close to, like, if I had to say the next two things they need to do to make this, like, even more perfect, is you need obviously a bigger default SSD, and you put an SD card slot back on it right before that thing becomes obsolete, right before no one uses SD cards anymore.
Sure.
And then you're basically done. But yeah, this is I feel exactly the same way you do. There's so many people in my life I was saying it's a slightly more complicated decision, but at this point you should wait for the M4. It's coming out soon, and now that it's here, it's like it's a no-brainer. It's just it's so it's so great not to have to try to convince people to upgrade the RAM. Right? We don't have to have that conversation anymore. You don't have to tell people what RAM is. It's just, and all you have to do is, how much stuff do you have? Because people understand that. How much stuff do you have? Do you have more than 256 gigs of stuff right now on your Mac laptop? Well, then you need to get a bigger one. And they understand that. It's like, oh, that's the stuff that I have. And that's it. And everything else about it, like, just the performance of their lowest price $1,000 laptop in single core, which is what matters for that, is amazing. The battery life that you get from the M4. The M4 is such a great chip. It's so perfect in the MacBook Air. Such an ideal combination of chip and laptop. This is and we're in the place where, like, this has been the design for a little while now, right? We're not like this is a brand new design or it's not getting old. It's just, this is a great computer. I'm going to recommend my father buy one of these. I'm going to get one for my daughter when she goes off to college. I got my son, I think it was the M2 one, which was the most recent one when he went off to college, and he's used that for his whole time in college so far. So yeah, this is basically taking a Mac that was already great and making it even better. And even though I can see ways it could still improve, it is a relief to just see this computer come out and have it be like back in the 2011 MacBook Air days when you knew exactly what computer to recommend to everybody. This is that again. They've took them a long time to get back to that. There was a dark period where it was non-Retina, and then there was the whole Apple Silicon transition. I mean, arguably the M1 MacBook Air was pretty close to that, but it didn't have MagSafe and stuff like that. So but yeah, M4 MacBook Air, great computer. If you need a Mac laptop and you don't know what you need and your needs are not high, get this computer. It will, as long as you don't drop it or break it, it will last you so long.
I get the idea too about storage being the tall poppy, but one knock-on effect from it being $999 is that also means that the 512 storage is just an add-on to 9.99 instead of an add-on to
Yep.
10.99 or 11.99, which means if you say, well, yes, but 16 gigs of RAM and 512 SSD is the minimum anybody should buy. Well, guess what? Those used to be way more expensive too. They're not 9.99,
Right.
but they're less than they were because the 16 is now thrown in, and it was 256 to start when it was more expensive too. So it's now you're starting down at 9.99, and if you need more storage you can add it. So it still is. That's what I've already told a couple of people is, we'll get this and consider the 512 storage upgrade, but otherwise it's just great.
Yeah. And they're
The
also
blue,
enjoying
I
this,
don't know,
like,
but
I don't know how brief it is, but they're enjoying a period now where we're still in a situation where it is reasonable for the least expensive Apple laptop to have a non-HDR, non-120 hertz screen. We just talked about that on the phone before, and it's kind of untenable for a $1,000 phone to have a 60 hertz screen. But still, I would say they have not passed out of the area where it makes sense for their cheapest laptop to not have the amazing screen that's on the MacBook Pros. At a certain point, that won't be true. At a certain point, every Mac will need to have a 120 hertz HDR screen, but we're not there yet. So enjoy this time when you don't have to look. It's like when the MacBook Air was non-retina. When it was non-retina and most everybody was non-retina, it's like, yeah, that seems appropriate. But it was non-retina for way too long. And at a certain point, you're like, oh, the MacBook Air, it's a good computer, but it's still not retina. Can you believe they haven't made a retina MacBook Air? So enjoy this period of peace in MacBook Air Kingdom, where the computer is well spec'd and well priced, and it's a great computer, and the chip is great, and the things that it has make sense for the price point,
yeah,
and have the things that most people need. Because a few years from now, we'll be back on this program saying, I cannot believe that the MacBook Air still doesn't
so
have a
complicated.
120 hertz screen.
Yeah. No, now's the time. The sun is shining on the MacBook Air right now, from out of a blue sky.
Bluish.
But the less said about that,
I went to the Apple Store, by the way. I went to an Apple
Did you?
Store to look at these, and they had a gold one sitting next to one that was either silver or blue.
Starlight.
And I swear to you, could not determine. I refused to ask the help. I could not determine what color that was.
Yeah.
I went to the About This Mac
Yeah.
to see if it would reveal if it's
Nope.
buried in there. I couldn't find it. I could not tell. To this day, I don't know if it was silver or blue.
The sole way to tell, because it's so subtle, is you have to have brighter light or different colored light. You have to tilt it. You have to go so much, and this is because that's the idea, is it's super subtle. And like, again, whatever, I get, they must just really feel like this is the way, is it's got to be a silver laptop, and then it could be light silver or dark silver, it could be blue silver or yellow silver, but it's still silver, or it's black/navy.
I'm leaning towards it being silver because, again, the gold one was next to it, and I could tell the gold one was gold, but I could not tell what color the one
John,
next to it was.
I swear to you, I almost gave this away on last Monday with Gruber, and I was under embargo, so I kind of had to pivot really quick to having it be a more general anecdote. But I can now reveal, when I opened my review unit of that sky blue, I thought they sent me silver. I just assumed they sent me silver, and I thought that's a weird choice when you have a new color to send the reviewers the old color. And then I did a search on my shipping manifest from the Apple PR reviews program. It says sky. I'm like, I guess this is it. And I had to go get a silver. I got a silver MacBook Air and a silver Apple TV remote, and I laid them on it. And I was like, oh, it is. I mean, even then it was sort of like, it is a little darker, and I guess that could be blue. But at that point, isn't my brain making it blue? I don't. And blue is my good color, John. Blue is a good color.
They're just gaslighting you by sending you a box that says sky blue, but putting a silver one in it.
I mean, I wondered, but it does seem like maybe it is blue now. I don't know. This episode of Upgrade is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is, of course, the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online, whether you're just starting out or scaling your business. Squarespace will give you everything you need. You can claim your domain. You can showcase all of your offerings with a professional-looking website. You can grow your brand and get paid, and you can do it all in one place thanks to Squarespace. Now, I have a lot of friends who are very savvy who can build websites out of nothing if they want to. And you know what? Many of them use Squarespace because it's just that easy. Also, it's easy to maintain. It's easy to hand it off to somebody if you're somebody who's a website builder, or you can build it yourself. Stephen Hackett talks about this a lot, where he's got friends and people doing school things and nonprofits and all of that. And you're like, I need a website. You're a computer guy. What do you? It's like, all right. And you can do it in like minutes or hours, and then you can hand it over and say, here it is, Squarespace, or you can just do it yourself. That is the beauty of Squarespace. You do not have to build an entire stack of tech things in order to be present on the internet. And among other things, you can manage videos easily. You can now upload video content, organize your video library, showcase your content on beautiful video pages, even, how about this, sell access to your video library by paywalling your content, which is great for something like an online course or tutorial or a workshop or something like that. You can post those videos and then lock them away. And then you got a business of a video. That's pretty good. People like that in the 21st century. You can offer your services and get paid, consultants, events, experiences, showcase all your offerings with your customizable website. It's designed to attract clients and grow your business. Things like built-in appointment scheduling, email marketing tools, they're all in there. Keep everything cohesive with on-brand invoices. Get paid easily with online payments. Squarespace does it all. I guess there's an asterisk there. It won't necessarily like bring you a cookie, but it does pretty much website things, all of them. Go to squarespace.com/upgrade for a free trial. When you're ready to launch, use offer code upgrade and you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/upgrade and offer code upgrade to get 10% off your first purchase and show your support for this show. Thank you to Squarespace for supporting Upgrade and all of Relay. John, you have any opinions about the Mac Studio? I mean, I don't know. It's just a little update. Whatever.
You know, speaking of things that like build up over time and you're waiting for that big release, I feel very much like I did at the beginning of ATP when we were waiting for them to update the Mac Pro with an appropriate successor. The way back when I read that blog post, The Case for a True Mac Pro Successor, you have to look at the date of that to realize I was writing that before the trash can came out. So, which at least was like them trying, right? The story for the whole Apple Silicon era has been, but what do you do with the really big, powerful Mac? Because we know you don't sell a lot of them. And that is actually the most difficult kind of chip to make. And it costs the most. And it's, it's just, you want me to spend all this money on a computer that I sell so few of, and the chips are so powerful. We just got done saying the MacBook Air is more Mac than anybody ever needs. Why are we even trying to do this? And I have been a strong proponent of, this is this thing you need to do. Not because it will make you money, because it will not, or it shouldn't. I think it shouldn't. I think you should lose money on every Mac Pro that you sell. You should be making it the same reason, like I said in that post, the same reason car companies make concept cars or limited production sports cars that lose money on every one that they sell. They make them because they're car people and they like fast cars, and it helps the business, it helps morale, it helps the people who work for you. It has a halo effect outside the company. Apple should always be trying to make the fastest personal computer ever made. If they're trying to do that now, they're not doing a great job, because thus far they have had, as far as we know in the outside world, lots of interesting ideas and plans about how they could make an appropriate super high-end Mac with Apple Silicon, and they have not been able to let any of them see the light of day. So instead what we've gotten are the Mac Studio, which is an amazing computer that is tiny and sitting behind you there. Look how small it is. So powerful, so great. It's basically like take our laptops and put them in a desktop case with way better cooling and more ports and all the things that you get from a desktop. That's a great computer. No shade on the Mac Studio. And then the Mac Pro is like, it's a Mac Studio with slots that you can't do much with.
Yay.
So the Mac Studio now gets a little bit of the Mac Pro treatment. Oh, Mac Studio has been perfect. Everything's great about the Mac Studio. They, in fact, do make a chip for the Mac Studio called the Ultra series of chip, and that is appropriate for a computer that big. And it's a really good chip for a computer that big. And they made the M1 Ultra, and they made the M2 Ultra. Then the M3 came along, and there was no M3 Ultra. We're like, what's up with that? Anyway, the M4 came along. M4s are great. Everyone loves M4s. They're great in all their computers. They're going to come up with a Mac Studio. They'll put the M4 Max in that one. It will be great. Don't know what the deal with the Ultra is, but like an M4 Mac Studio is great too. And so they put out the new Mac Studio. It's got an M4 Max in it, which is a great chip for that.
It's great.
But it's also got an Ultra chip. And guess what? It's the M3 Ultra.
Yeah, here we are at the end of the M4 generation. And here's an M3 Ultra.
It's like, hey, I exist too. It's like, where? We were looking for you a long time ago, and you didn't appear, so we assumed you wouldn't exist. But here you are.
We thought you died.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say the M3 Ultra is not an appropriate chip for the Mac Studio, because it is. It's just an appropriate chip for the Mac Studio last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they said, look, I got the briefing. I was on the same briefing as Gruber. I don't know the exact wording, and I wouldn't be allowed to quote it anyway. But I got the strong impression that the goal with the M3 Ultra was to make it Thunderbolt 5 and like to soup up and have more addressable RAM and all of that. And they're never going to say it because again they're a very proud company. But my guess is that project got it got delayed. Like they weren't able to do it, and they threw some shade. I would say during that briefing, at least the suggestion was that the Thunderbolt certifying it for Thunderbolt 5 took longer than they expected, and they waved their hands at it because it is weird, right? It's a weird choice that they did it, and that they chose not to release an M3 Max Studio without the Ultra. They just delayed it, and they delayed it so long. I think this is probably the story. They delayed it so long that they had an M4 Max, so they're like, well, I guess we'll put that one in there. And let's be clear, 95%, I would say 90% of the Mac Studios that will be sold will be M3 Max or M4 Maxes,
and will actually be the fastest way to do most of the things that people will do with the Mac Studio.
Most work, because it's a slower core in the M3, but there are more of them. And so if you're doing work that requires all of that, like that extra top layer, it's worth the money to spend on getting it because it will be faster. But even in my briefing, Apple was like, it is faster than the M4 Max when it's maxed out. And they said when it's maxed out. And that's like literally, that's the only time it's faster is when it's maxed out.
And for your day-to-day work, though, when you're not doing maxing it out, the M4 Max is faster. Like it's not just as fast. It is faster. It is plain faster for most of the things you're going to be doing. So yeah,
because it's like, an M4, not an M3.
I was talking to Gruber about this actually, of like, back in the Intel days, we were kind of used to the old Intel's cadence, which would be they would make a bunch of CPUs, and often when they were having a new process node, Intel, back when they were the king of the fabs and they had the best process technology, they'd come up with a new one, and they usually make a laptop chip first, and then a desktop chip, and then like sometimes like a year and a half later, there'd be the Xeon that uses those cores. You didn't notice the connection because they didn't name them like Apple does, where it's like an M and a number, but the Xeon alphabet soup or whatever, you'd be like, well, that actually has the cores from last year's chips in them. And that was just the way we thought silicon would always work with CPUs because Intel was so dominant. So you make the small, easy laptop chip first, then you make the desktop chip, and then ages later you make the 28-core big giant Xeon. And everyone was fine with that. And by the way, the Xeons were slower in single core, right? They had slower clock speeds, but in exchange you got a huge number of cores. When Apple came out with Apple Silicon, it was so disruptive of like all your previous assumptions about how silicon work, throw them out the window because here's Apple Silicon. And it does things that seems like they shouldn't be possible. And one of those things I felt like was the time delay between the M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, and M1 Ultra was like, they're practically doing these not at the same time, but like it's not a Xeon timeline. The M1, I mean, M1 came out a little bit earlier than the other ones, but like the Pro and the Max and then the Ultra, and then the same schedule with the M2, how long those took. And then the M3, there was no Ultra, but the Pro and the Max seemed so contemporary with the other ones. The M4, I think they shipped the M4 Pro and Max before the plain M4 MacBook Air, which just came out, even though there was the plain M4 Mac Mini. And so the timelines were so compressed. And so now we're in this current era. It's like, well, if you look at the M3 Ultra, it's basically on a Xeon timeline with the M3s. And it's like, okay, well, two things for that. One, that's not what they had trained us to expect with the previous generations.
Yep.
Were those just anomalies and this is the norm or whatever? Like, we'll see how that goes. But two, one of their explanations that you just gave for the delay in the M3 Ultra is like, oh, well, we made the M3 in the Thunderbolt 4 era, and to make the M3 Ultra make sense at all, we have to put Thunderbolt 5 on it. Because can you imagine if the M3 Ultra came with Thunderbolt 4 and like all the old stuff?
Yeah.
And if the gap is long enough between the M whatever and its Ultra variant, you end up having to ship that chip in a world where there's a new version of Thunderbolt. And by the way, that delays you even more because now you are retrofitting, like the whole M3 line was not made with Thunderbolt 5 in mind. It didn't exist. And now you have to jam it in there, and that draws the timeline out longer. So whatever the appropriate time gap is between the plain old M and the Ultra version, I think this gap is too long. So shrink it up.
Imagine if last year they had shipped an M3 Max and M3 Ultra Max Studio, and they said, and the Ultra has Thunderbolt 5. We've gone to Thunderbolt 5. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And it was, I get the impression that it was too early or something like that, and that was a bad decision, I guess, on their part to plan it out that way, or it slipped. I don't know the
Or,
story,
or
but
they
he
hadn't
ends up.
been able to retrofit it in that timeline. It could
Yeah.
be like, I know they're blaming the certification, but maybe because it's a big deal to make a chip for both Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 5. So the Ultra is not just like, oh, we just two maxes and stick them together. No, you had to redo all the Thunderbolt
No,
stuff for the minimum, plus
they
the
did a
memory
bunch of stuff.
addressing, right?
Memory,
So
yep.
maybe it just took them longer to do that. Like, if you don't
Oops.
design the whole family up front, like the M1, Pro, Max, and Ultra, where they all have the same crap, and like that strategy, if you don't do that and they're of a piece, and the Ultras are somehow even more exotic and different, that's just going to push the Ultras out even farther to the point where you're shipping a computer with an M with two different numbers, M3 and M4.
Well, that's Gruber suggested last week that maybe they just need to come up with a new name for it, like the Xeon, where it just obfuscates the fact that it's using
hide
old
the fact
cores.
They do that. But like, I mean, I'm not ready to give up on it because like you did it with M1 and M2. Were those anomalies that we could never see to be repeated again? Like those timelines seemed reasonable to me. I believe you can do it again.
Given everything, that they've done with the Apple Silicon transition, that this is maybe the weirdest hiccup so far. Is I think they're still doing a pretty good batting average. For me, the weird thing about this, John, is that they didn't update the Mac Pro.
Well, so that's I was at an ATP. Like you look at this and you try to apply logic and you say, okay, they didn't update the Mac Pro, and also they said not every generation will have an Ultra, which is a strong hint that the M4 Ultra won't exist.
Yes.
So if I put those two together and use logic, that means the Mac Pro will have a chip that's not an M4 Ultra, but is even better. Finally, a chip appropriate to that case.
Or they care so little about the Mac Pro that they're just going to announce an M3 Ultra Mac Pro.
Exactly.
And the other shoe drops, and it's just like everybody's like, oh, womp womp. Those are. I feel those are our choices. I want to believe that there is an M4 Magic chip.
Yeah.
That is just for the Mac Pro, and that we're going to get maybe even a little TikTok thing where there's like a high-end studio chip one year and a Mac Pro chip the next year, and we go like that back and forth. I want to believe. But the other option, and it will just be so sad if like in June they're like, oh yeah, and also we added that chip that we shipped in March to the Mac Pro too. Yay. And then that's it.
Yeah.
And it remains functionally identical to the Mac Studio. Because what you want is, because I think some podcast I was on last week, we were talking about this. It's like the reason you wouldn't put that super high-end extreme chip in the Mac Studio is because the Mac Studio can't cool it.
It can't
fit.
Like,
it can't fit, can't cool it. And finally, there's a reason for the Mac Pro to exist.
Yeah, like that's the problem with applying the logic, that it leads you to these conclusions, but then you have to have out there of like, no, they just don't care. They're gonna be M3 Ultra is gonna be the highest end Mac Pro, and they're gonna roll it out at WWDC, and it will be like as disappointing as the M3 Ultra Mac Pro was, because it's like, what are they gonna do with the Mac Pro? Because it hadn't transitioned, like what are they gonna do with that? Nothing. They're just gonna same as the Studio, right? Like those two computers should not have the same top-end chip. The whole point is that that massive case with that massive cooling can handle things that tiny. Let the Mac Studio be the Mac Studio. It should not have the same chip in the Mac Pro. And so the fantasies of the extreme are still out there. And if they just ship it with the Ultra, it's like it's just another year of this built-up tension about like what are you doing? Like some people will say they should just get rid of the Mac Pro. Some people like me will say they should give it an appropriate chip. We know they've had designs and strategies of how to do something for that. They just haven't been able to execute on any of them, which fine. Like you try, you're ambitious. The Jade 4C die and the M1 didn't work out. Too expensive. Can't make the math. Whatever, right? Come up with a new plan. That's why my hope for the Mac Pro chip is that it is not any assemblage of Maxes, but is instead two things that are even bigger and badder than Maxes stuck together, or maybe just like, I don't know what the reticle limit is for how many, but like just a purpose-built thing just for the Mac Pro that absolutely would not fit in any other computer. And here's the thing. You can put the M3 Ultra in the Mac Pro too. You can put an M3 Max in the Mac Pro. Like, if people need card slots, like, don't tie them to paying, not that they're going to do this, but I don't begrudge less powerful chips in the Mac Pro, but that case needs a reason to exist. So I really hope they roll something out that is appropriate for that. And if they do just roll out the M3 Ultra and that's the top end, we'll see you here next year with my Believe shirt on. I'll just keep wearing that shirt until they stop using that case or until they finally figure out what they're going to do. And like, what you said before about the Studio, like it's kind of weird that they didn't ship it with the M3 Max, right? That the fact that they didn't ship the studio with the M3 Max when they could have. It was a chip that existed, and you could have put it in that case, and it would have been fine. The fact that they didn't do that lends credence to them rolling out an M3 Ultra Max Studio as top end. And you would say, but why didn't they roll that out when they did the studio? It's like, oh, they didn't feel like it. They didn't.
Yeah, or they could. It wasn't ready then.
Yeah, they wanted to save all of them for the studios.
They
And the
held
thing
the
is,
whole
like, the
thing.
volumes are so small here. You can't be like, oh, the Mac Studios are absorbing all those M3 Ultras. Really? Like, the volumes of everything is so small. Like,
No.
I know people, we just talked about, oh, what are they going to do with Apple Intelligence, WWDC? And, like, that is the more important thing to be watching. But my personal number one interest with a bullet going to WWDC, and continues to be from past years and this year, is what are you doing with the Mac Pro?
John, I have when we're talking about the logic of this timeline, I have a disconcerting suggestion for you, which is it comes and goes. There's no Mac Pro news. In the fall, the MacBook Pros come out with the M5 Pro and Max chips. In the spring, the MacBook Air comes out with the M5. And in WWDC 2026, the M4 Extreme is released after all M5 chips have been released.
You sound like a
that's in
sports
the Mac
fan who's
Pro.
saying there's always next year. We'll get them next year.
I don't know. I worry that we're now saying, well, yeah, but the M4 Extreme is going to come on the M4 timeline, and what we just saw with the M3 Ultra is that it didn't. So
right now, here's the thing though. Like, if they do in 2026, they come out with an Extreme chip. The existence of the Extreme chip alone gives it excuses that the existence of the Ultra, the M3 Ultra, does not, because they've never made a chip like this. They've made multiple Ultras before, which is why it's so disappointing that the timeline in this one. If 2026 they come out with the M4 Extreme, still I will be jazzed, because it's like, you did it. You made a chip that's the big, like,
sign.
It took a long time. It's probably going to be expensive, but you did it. And so I actually won't be that mad about that at all.
I have to believe that Ben Thompson's reaction to the M3 Ultra, which was, oh, when you start having that much RAM available to the GPUs, it starts to get really interesting in a lot of AI applications, because you can run enormous AI models on it. Not the biggest, but some big ones. I cannot imagine that people inside Apple who are working on Apple Silicon have not had that same thought, and that perhaps that is one of the selling points of an M4 Extreme will be, look at how much addressable RAM we are going to give these things.
There's the private cloud compute angle, which is like, okay, so Apple doesn't care enough about the Mac Pro to actually ship a chip appropriate for it, but they seem to care a lot about private cloud compute. And yeah, they're using M2 Ultras in there now, but the rumors are that they're going to make a chip appropriate for doing AI in the cloud stuff with, huge amounts of addressable memory and huge resources. Maybe the thing that the Mac Pro could not make happen, which is an appropriate chip, the private cloud compute will make happen. And the Mac Pro team are like, can we just use what you're using for the private cloud compute servers and like vaguely repurpose it to the Mac Pro? Because we tried to make our own chip for this computer, and they would never let us do it. But you're doing it for the data center. Can we steal that and stick it in a Mac Pro and call it the M4 Extreme? That's the desperation we're in now, which is like something that Apple cares enough about to actually fund. Because I think they're going to do private cloud compute. I think they're going to make a purpose-built server chip for private cloud compute.
Gurman says made in America, too, which is perfect, because that's a Mac Pro kind of deal, too, because they're low volume.
Well, the chip won't be. The chip will be fabbed in Taiwan.
Yeah, but they'll assemble them all.
Yeah, sure. Wherever they assemble these, but yeah, like that is a chance. And I don't think that it'll be like, oh, they're going to repurpose the Mac Pro chip for private cloud compute. No, it's entirely going to be the thing Apple actually cares about, which is Apple Intelligence and private cloud compute. They'll make that. And then if the Mac Pro team can say, finally something exists for us to stick in this case, can we steal that from you? We'll see how that works out.
Before we go, I have one ask upgrade question that is perfectly a good way to end, a perfect segue. It comes from Hank. It says, when speculating on an Apple Silicon chip above the Ultra, why aren't all the old Mac heads, that's us, John, leaning toward calling it a Quadra? Seems like a good fit because quad means 4, and it's hypothetically going to have 4 Max chips welded together. I personally became a Mac user in 2004, so is Quadra a bad idea because there is baggage with those computers, or is it just too dated? Just an opportunity to say Quadra, which is a fun old Mac name. Quadras weren't bad. Quadras were really
there's no
good.
baggage. That's a great name.
No baggage.
They had a great reputation. They felt so fast. I remember the first time I touched a Quadra in like an Apple, not an Apple retail store, an Apple retailer, a third-party seller. No Apple stores existed then. Anyway, first time I touched one, I was like just pulling down menus. It felt like when I first used the SE30, like the 68040 and the Quadras, which I believe is the origin of the quad. It was the 4.
Yes, it's the 040.
040s, right? So fast. Great name recognition for those computers. It was back when Macs cost even more than they do today. If you can, hard to believe, but it was true.
It was Pentium before Pentium in the sense that they made a brand name out of the code number of the chip, essentially.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't think they'll reuse that name because I don't think the right approach to the Mac Pro is at this point, considering their attempts, is 4 of them because it's a waste of a lot of resources. They should reallocate the space that they would have for 4 of them. Like you have the problem with crosstalk and the communication overhead, and even just doing 2 of them, they've struggled to make it twice as fast. So I think they're better off making 2 really big things that look like nothing they've ever made and sticking them together than picking 4 of their existing things. And so that kind of rules out the Quadra name. And I don't think they would reuse it because it's definitely a 90s era Apple marketing name. Even though we have nostalgia for it, today's Apple would never pick a name like that.
Yeah, it's true, but it's a fun name, and there's no baggage. I just wanted to clear the Quadra's name. It was a great
Quadra is a name of honor. Yeah,
there were a lot of computers that Apple was selling then, and you knew that if you got the Quadra, you were getting the really, really good chip.
That's right.
It was really fast, and yes, it was the end of the Motorola era, and then we got our PowerPCs that were amazing. But like in the day, the Quadra was awesome. That was the best. I remember looking on to a co-worker's Quadra when I started a Mac user with great envy, but then the PowerPC came out and everything changed. All right, that is going to be the end of our regular episode. Of course, Upgrade Plus, we will continue the discussion. I'm going to ask John about his new app, Hyperspace, which is now available in the Mac App Store. And if you would like to be a part of Ask Upgrade, upgradefeedback.com is the place to go. I have to read all the feedback while Mike is gone, so be nice. Thank you in advance. And get upgradeplus.com if you want to hear that extra segment every week. And also if you want to support Mike and Mike's Baby, that's a great way to do it. You can find us on YouTube. Just search for Upgrade Podcast. You can see me and John in person, but you've got to the end of this episode, so it'll be repetitive. It'll be redundant. I don't know. But I also want to thank our sponsors this week. Thank you so much to Delete Me, Fitbod, Google Gemini, and Squarespace. Most of all, thanks to everybody out there for listening. Thanks to John Siracusa for being our guest this week. Thank you, John.
Loved it as always.